The snow came down like judgment, heavy, relentless, the kind that buried mistakes and memories alike beneath a white shroud that forgave nothing. James Hawkins stood at his workshop window in Montana, watching flakes the size of quarters drift past the glass, and thought about how snow had always meant death in his life. First time was decades ago in jungles he could no longer name. Last time was about to be now. The phone rang at 2 in the morning. Nobody calls with good news at 2 in the morning. Hawk knew this the way he knew the weight of his rifle, the way he knew the sound a man makes when he dies, the way he knew his own face in the mirror had become his father's face somewhere along the years when he wasn't paying attention. He let it ring 3 times. His hand, scarred and steady despite 58 years of wear, reached for the receiver. The wood of his workbench was smooth under his palm. He'd been carving a memorial plaque for a Marine who died in Beirut. The boy's mother had asked for something special, something that said her son mattered. Hawk always said yes to those requests, always would. The voice on the other end belonged to Thomas Maddox. They'd called him Bull since the early 70s when he'd charged an enemy position alone and come back with 3 prisoners and a bullet in his shoulder. Bull was 62 now. His voice still carried that same granite certainty that had kept Hawk alive through 13 months of combat in places the world had tried to forget. Just 2 words at first. Then silence stretching like a wire about to snap. "I need you." Hawk closed his eyes. The workshop smelled like pine shavings and old coffee. Outside, Montana was silent the way only deep winter could make it. No wind, no animals, just snow falling, and the weight of a phone call that was about to crack his life open again. "The war ended 20 years ago, Bull. Not this one." Hawk waited. "You learned patience in combat. You learned to let silence do the work that words couldn't. You learned that the space between sentences was where truth lived." 480 Marines trapped in northern Iraq. Republican Guard remnants. The kind that didn't surrender when Saddam told them to. The kind that remembered what Americans did to the highway of death and wanted payback. The kind that knew how to kill and had nothing left to lose. Bull's voice went quieter, almost gentle. "The way you talk to a man when you're about to ask him to die. Rachel is with them." The plaque fell from Hawk's hands, hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. His daughter. His little girl who used to stand on his boots while he taught her to dance. Who'd learned to shoot a rifle at 10 because she wanted to understand why her father looked so sad sometimes. Who joined the Marines at 22 despite everything he'd said, every warning he'd given, every truth about war he'd tried to share. She was 32 now, a combat medic. She'd written him 3 months ago from somewhere in the Gulf. "Dad, I finally understand. I understand why you wake up screaming. I understand why you drink. I understand why you can't watch fireworks. I'm sorry I ever judged you." He hadn't written back yet, kept meaning to, kept finding reasons not to. What do you say to your daughter when she's seeing the things you spent 30 years trying to forget? 18 hours later, Hawk was at Fort Bragg, standing in a briefing room that smelled like stale coffee and desperation. The walls were covered in maps. Northern Iraq, mountains, snow, terrain that looked like God had taken a knife to the earth just to see what would happen. General Patterson stood at the front, 68 years old, silver hair, eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. He'd been a young officer in the same wars Hawk had fought, lost half his company in a valley that didn't have a name, came back different. They all did. The situation was clean on paper. Simple. Surgical. 480 Marines escorting a defector from Mosul to the Turkish border. An Iraqi nuclear scientist who'd decided Saddam's vision of the future didn't include him breathing. The kind of intelligence asset that made careers and ended threats before they started. Then the weather turned. Then the radios died. Then 300 Republican Guard troops who were supposed to be surrendered and processed decided they had one more fight in them. Now the Marines were pinned in a box canyon with their backs against a cliff and winter trying to kill them as efficiently as the Iraqis. 72 hours until reinforcements. Maybe, if the weather cleared, if the Iraqis didn't get reinforced first, if a lot of things that weren't likely happened in the right order at the right time. Patterson looked at Hawk the way you look at a tool you're not sure will hold together for one more job. "I need someone who knows winter warfare, someone who knows guerrilla tactics, someone who can train snipers under fire and make Marines believe they can win when everything says they should die." The map showed elevation, showed approaches, showed a killing ground that had been designed by someone who understood how terrain could murder better than bullets. Hawk studied it with the part of his brain that had never left the wars he'd fought, the part that saw every ridgeline as a firing position and every valley as a grave. I'm 58, General. My knees sound like gravel in a blender. I sleep 4 hours a night if I'm lucky. I haven't fired a rifle in combat since I retired in '91. Patterson nodded, knew all that already. But your brain is still the best I've got, and your daughter is in that canyon. Patterson paused, let the weight settle. You served 23 years, Hawk. Force recon, multiple tours, retired as Master Sergeant in early '91, right before Desert Storm kicked off. You'd earned your rest, but I need you one more time, not to fight, to teach, to train, to turn 400 scared kids into survivors. Hawk had spent those 23 years learning how to kill, learning how to lead, learning that war took more than it gave and never stopped taking. He'd retired thinking he was done, thinking he could carve wood and raise horses and forget. But forgetting was impossible when your daughter walked into the same darkness that had swallowed part of her father and never spit it back out whole. When do I leave? 4 hours. You'll halo jump with a team. Senior advisors, men who know what they're doing, men who are probably too old for this, but are the only ones I trust to get it done. Hawk looked at the map again, saw the terrain, saw the trap, saw his daughter's face in every shadow and contour line. I'll need to pick my team. The men came one by one to the briefing room. Ghosts from wars that were supposed to be forgotten. Faces that had aged into something harder than stone and more brittle than glass. Bull Maddox arrived first. 62 years old, built like a loading dock, gray hair cut high and tight, eyes that still scanned for threats in every room he entered. He'd retired 5 years ago, bought a bar in North Carolina, spent his days listening to young Marines tell war stories that made him want to laugh and cry at the same time. He saw Hawk and something passed between them that didn't need words. A question and an answer, a promise made in blood and mud decades earlier that still held weight. You look like hell, Hawk. You look worse. They shook hands, held on longer than necessary. Two old men remembering when they'd been young and stupid and somehow survived anyway. Marcus Stone came next, 55 years old, black as midnight, soft-spoken. They called him Preacher because he'd been a chaplain's assistant for 20 years before someone realized he could shoot the wings off a fly at 800 meters. He didn't talk much, didn't need to. His eyes said everything worth saying. He nodded to Hawk, sat down without a word. His hands were steady, always had been. The steadiest hands Hawk had ever seen on a trigger. The door opened again and Michael Murphy rolled in. Rolled because he had one leg. The other had stayed in Beirut in 1983 when a truck bomb turned a barracks into a crematorium. He'd gotten out. 63 Marines hadn't. Murphy wore a prosthetic now, worked as an explosives consultant, taught young EOD techs how to think like bombs. He was 60 years old, face like weathered leather, smile like broken glass. Heard you needed someone who knows how to make things go boom. Hawk almost smiled, almost. The last man through the door was David Lee. 57, Chinese-American, quiet, brilliant. He'd spent the Cold War listening to Soviet radio traffic and learning to speak 7 languages fluently enough to dream in them. Now he consulted for defense contractors and taught at Georgetown. He looked like a professor, moved like a ghost. 5 old men in a room full of maps and coffee that tasted like regret. 5 men who should have been fishing or playing with grandchildren or doing anything except preparing to jump out of a perfectly good airplane into a war zone. Patterson looked at them with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. You're all volunteers. You can walk away right now. No one would blame you. None of them moved. You'll insert by halo at 35,000 feet. The weather is garbage. Visibility near zero. You'll be jumping into a hot zone with limited supplies and no guarantee of extraction. Your job is to link up with the Marines, assess the situation, and train them to survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. He paused, let that sink in. The Iraqis have 300 troops on the ground. More coming. They have the high ground. They have supplies. They have time. You have 5 old men in 72 hours. Murphy laughed. Actually laughed. A sound like gravel in a disposal. So basically, it's a fair fight. Nobody else laughed. Nobody else could. The plane ride was smooth until it wasn't. 35,000 feet over northern Iraq. The cargo bay was cold enough to make bones ache, cold enough to make breathing hurt, cold enough to remind them all that they were flying into winter wearing nothing but a parachute and bad ideas. Hawk sat with his back against the bulkhead, eyes closed, not sleeping, just gone somewhere else. Somewhere that looked like Montana and smelled like pine and held no sounds of war. Bull sat across from him, checking his gear for the 100th time. Old habits, the kind that kept you alive or at least kept you busy while you waited to die. You thinking about the old days? Hawk opened his eyes, knew exactly what Bull meant. The campaigns they'd fought together, the valleys where they'd been pinned, the times when death seemed certain and survival seemed like cheating. Always thinking about the old days. Bull nodded, went back to his gear check. Preacher was praying, lips moving silent, hands folded. Hawk had never asked what faith Preacher followed. Figured it didn't matter. God heard all prayers the same, or didn't hear any of them at all. Murphy was asleep, actually asleep. The man could sleep anywhere, could sleep through artillery, could sleep in a firefight if the lull lasted long enough. It was a gift, the kind of gift you developed when you'd seen enough horror that consciousness felt like punishment. Lai was studying a map with a penlight, making notes in margins. He'd intercepted some Iraqi radio traffic before they left. Nothing concrete, just patterns, movements. The kind of intelligence that might mean everything or might mean nothing but was all they had. The loadmaster gave them the 10-minute warning. Hand signals because the engines were too loud for words. Time to hook up. Time to check the man next to you. Time to remember that parachutes were just fabric and prayer, and sometimes prayers didn't get answered. Hawk stood, joints protesting, back aching, 58 years old and about to jump into darkness at terminal velocity. He'd done it before, long time ago, when his bones were younger and his reasons were different. Now he was jumping for Rachel, for the daughter who'd grown up and walked into hell because she'd wanted to understand her father. Bull caught his eye, gave him the nod, the one that said everything that needed saying. We're in this, together, like always. The ramp opened and the world became noise and wind and cold that hit like a fist. Iraq spread out below them, dark, vast, unforgiving. Somewhere down there, his daughter was surrounded by men who wanted her dead. Somewhere down there, 480 Marines were counting hours until they ran out of ammunition or hope, or both. The loadmaster pointed. Go time. Hawk stepped into nothing, fell into darkness. The wind tore at him like something alive and angry. The cold hit hard enough to make thought difficult. He counted seconds, waited for the chute to deploy, prayed to a god he wasn't sure existed that the silk would catch and hold and bring him down somewhere close to alive. The chute opened, jerked him hard. Suddenly he was floating instead of falling, descending through snow that turned the world into static. He couldn't see the ground, couldn't see the other men, couldn't see anything except white and more white, and the certainty that this was going to go wrong because it always went wrong. Impact came sudden and violent. His legs took the shock but barely, rolled, came up tangled in silk, got free, grabbed his rifle, scanned the darkness with eyes that had learned to see in shadows. Bull landed 30 meters away, came up smooth, professional. Made it look easy even though Hawk knew his friend's knees were shot and his back was held together with cortisone and stubbornness. Preacher touched down light as snow, gathered his chute, moved to cover, always thinking, always 2 steps ahead. Lee came down hard, too hard, went to one knee, stayed there too long. When he stood, his face was tight with pain, but he didn't make a sound. Murphy hit wrong. The prosthetic leg couldn't take the impact the way flesh could. He went down in a heap. His chute dragged him 20 feet before he got free. When he stood, his face was white, and Hawk knew without asking that something had broken. They moved together, formed up, did the thing they'd done 1,000 times in 1,000 different hells, checked each other, made sure nobody was bleeding out or broken beyond use. Found Lee was furthest from the rally point, 2 kilometers off target. He'd try to catch up. Might make it, might not. Murphy's ankle was fractured. The prosthetic had taken damage. He could move, but not fast. Not far. It was bad. It was workable. It was what they had. Bull took point, moved through the snow like a man half his age, led them toward the coordinates where 480 Marines were supposed to be dying quietly. They found the first bodies after 2 kilometers. 30 Marines, lined up in the snow, hands bound behind their backs. Single shots to the head. Execution style. The kind of war crime that made headlines when people cared enough to look. Preacher knelt beside one. Young, maybe 19. Face frozen in an expression that looked like surprise. Like he'd never believed it would end this way. The dog tags were cold. Preacher read them aloud because someone needed to bear witness. Someone needed to say the names. Private First Class Jennifer Martinez, 19 years old, San Antonio, Texas. They stood in the snow looking at 30 kids who died on their knees while the world looked away. Hawk felt something crack inside his chest, the thing that had kept him sane for 30 years. The barrier between the man he'd been in combat and the man he'd tried to become after. Rachel was out here somewhere, in this, surrounded by men who did this. He keyed his radio, tried to raise the Marine position, got static, tried again, more static. Then a voice, faint, breaking up. Female. His daughter's voice. Dad, if you can hear this, they have us surrounded. Captain Reeves gave up our position. Someone is feeding them information. There's a traitor. I don't know who. I don't know how much time we have. But if you're out there, if you're really coming, please hurry, please. The transmission died. Bull looked at Hawk in the darkness. Neither man spoke. Words were useless. They moved faster now, pushed through snow that came to their knees, pushed through cold that wanted to stop their hearts, pushed because somewhere ahead Rachel was alive, and that was all that mattered. The Marine perimeter was a joke, sentries half frozen, spacing too wide, disciplined shot. Hawk and his team walked right through. Nobody challenged them. Nobody even noticed until they were standing in the middle of the command post. Captain David Reeves looked up from a map. 39 years old, West Point, Bronze Star, all the credentials that looked good on paper and meant nothing in the reality of winter and death, and men who'd stopped caring about tomorrow. His face was gray, eyes hollow, hands shaking just enough to notice. Who the hell are you? Hawk didn't answer right away. He was looking around, counting. 400 Marines scattered through the trees, maybe 60 wounded, low on ammunition, lower on hope. They had the look, the one that said they'd already died inside and were just waiting for their bodies to catch up. Master Sergeant James Hawkins, we're here to help. Reeves laughed, actually laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Help? You're 5 old men. You can't help. Nobody can help. We're dead. We're just taking a while to finish dying. Bull stepped forward. His voice went quiet, dangerous. You're a captain. Act like one. Reeves flinched, looked away. His command post was chaos. Maps everywhere. Radio equipment scattered. Coffee cups growing mold. The headquarters of a man who'd lost control and didn't know how to get it back. Hawk needed to find Rachel. Needed to see with his own eyes that she was alive. He moved through the Marine positions, past men who looked at him with empty faces. Kids who'd aged 30 years in 3 days. Kids who'd learned that war wasn't glory or honor or any of the things the recruiters promised. It was cold and fear and watching your friends die for reasons that made less sense every hour. He found her in what passed for a medical station, a tarp strung between trees. Wounded men on the ground, blood in the snow, the smell of infection and gangrene and bodies shutting down. Rachel looked up. Her face was thin, exhausted, hands red from cold and blood. She wore corporal stripes on her sleeve. E4, combat medic. She had their mother's eyes, the ones Hawk had fallen in love with 35 years ago, the ones he'd watched close for the last time when cancer took her 5 years back. For a moment, neither of them moved. Father and daughter, separated by 30 feet and 30 years of arguments and silence and love that neither knew how to express without hurting. Then Rachel stood, walked to him, put her arms around him and held on like she was drowning, and he was air. You came. Her voice broke on the words. Hawk held her. This woman who was his little girl, who'd learned to dance on his boots, who'd asked him why he looked sad and he'd never found words to answer. Always, Marines don't leave Marines. She pulled back, looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. I'm sorry I never understood. About the nightmares, about the drinking, about why you couldn't watch fireworks without leaving the room. I understand now, Dad. I understand everything. Hawk touched her face, rough fingers gentle against her cheek. You're doing your old man proud, Doc. The medical situation was critical. 40 wounded, 12 critical, not enough morphine, Not enough bandages, not enough of anything except cold and fear, and the certainty that help wasn't coming fast enough. Rachel showed him the worst cases. Kids with gut shots, kids with shattered bones, kids with frostbite so severe they'd lose fingers and toes even if they made it home. We can't evacuate, we can't operate. All I can do is make them comfortable while they die. Her voice was flat, clinical, the voice of someone who'd learned to turn off feelings because feeling anything hurt too much. Hawk squeezed her shoulder, left her to her work, went to find Captain Reeves and figure out how 480 people were going to survive the next 72 hours. The command post was worse up close. Reeves sat with his head in his hands. Maps spread around him like evidence of failure. Staff Sergeant Tyler Owens stood nearby, 35 years old, combat veteran. The kind of NCO who held units together when officers couldn't. Owens looked at Hawk with something like hope. "You're the advisor?" "One of them." Owens nodded toward Reeves. "He hasn't given a coherent order in 12 hours. Lost 18 men yesterday because he had them patrol a valley without reconnaissance. Lost 6 more this morning because he wouldn't authorize suppressive fire without visual confirmation of targets. The men don't trust him. I don't trust him. But he's still the CO and we're still Marines, so we follow orders even when the orders are killing us." Hawk studied Reeves. Saw a man who'd been trained for war but never prepared for it, who'd read Clausewitz and Sun Tzu, but never learned that theory dies when the first bullet flies. Who'd gotten good men killed because he couldn't accept that war was chaos and chaos didn't care about doctrine. "Captain." Reeves looked up. His eyes were red. He'd been crying. No shame in that. Hawk had cried plenty in his time. But officers couldn't cry where the men could see. Officers had to be rocks even when they were crumbling inside. "I need a situation report. Enemy positions, our strength, supply status, everything." Reeves opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his maps like they might have answers. "I don't know, they're everywhere. We can't get good reconnaissance because of the snow. Radio intercepts are in Arabic, and we don't have a translator. We're down to 30% ammunition. Food runs out tomorrow. Water is from melted snow. We've been here 3 days, and I don't know anything except we're going to die." His voice rose on those last words, pitched toward panic. Some of the Marines nearby looked over, saw their commander breaking, saw the fear they all felt reflected in the man who was supposed to lead them through it. Bull stepped in. His voice was iron. "Captain Reeves, you're going to stand up. You're going to take a breath. And you're going to remember that 400 Marines are watching you right now. They don't need you to have all the answers. They need you to act like you believe they can survive. Can you do that?" Reeves stood, wavered, found something inside himself. Maybe not courage, maybe just stubbornness, maybe just the last shred of pride that wouldn't let him collapse completely. Yes, I can do that." "Good. Now sit down and tell us everything. Don't spare details. Don't try to make it sound better than it is. We need truth." The truth was grim. 300 Iraqi Republican Guard troops, elite units, the kind that had fought Iran for 8 years, the kind that knew how to kill and didn't mind dying. They had mortars, machine guns, rockets. They had supply lines. They had time. The Marines had 400 rifles and not enough bullets, had 60 wounded slowing them down, had a defector they were supposed to protect, had terrain that worked against them, and weather that was trying to kill them as efficiently as the enemy. They'd been ambushed 72 hours ago, lost 18 in the first hour, lost more every day since. Reeves had tried to break out twice. Both times the Iraqis had been waiting. Both times Marines had died for nothing. Now they were pinned, surrounded, waiting for relief that might not come, waiting for the Iraqis to get bored with the siege and just overrun them, waiting to die. Hawk listened, asked questions, studied the maps with eyes that saw terrain the way a poet saw words. Every ridgeline was a weapon. Every valley was a trap. Every piece of ground had purpose if you knew how to use it. "Where's the defector?" Reeves pointed to a tent. Dr. Khalid al-Rashid, Iraqi nuclear scientist, supposed to have information about Saddam's weapons program. "That's why we're here. That's why 18 Marines are dead, to protect one man and whatever secrets he's carrying." Hawk wanted to talk to the defector, wanted to look in his eyes and see if those secrets were worth the blood they'd cost. But that could wait. First, they needed to survive the next 72 hours. Then they could worry about why. Lee had made it to the perimeter. 2 kilometers in deep snow with gear that weighed 60 pounds. He looked like death, but he was smiling. The man loved a challenge. He had news. Bad news. The kind that made bad situations worse. I intercepted Iraqi radio traffic. They're getting reinforcements. 800 troops, 6 tanks, arriving in 48 hours, maybe less if the road's clear. Bull swore. Did the math. Math that didn't work. 400 Marines against 1,100 Iraqis plus armor. That wasn't a fight. That was a massacre with extra steps. We need to move, now. Break the siege and run for the Turkish border. Reeves shook his head. We tried. 3 times. They have every route covered. We can't move the wounded fast enough. We'd have to leave them. Murphy spoke for the first time since landing. His voice was rough, tired. Then we make them move. Hit their supply lines. Kill their leadership. Make staying here more expensive than letting us go. Preacher nodded, his quiet voice somehow carrying weight. We turn the trap around. Make them the prey. Hawk looked at his team. 5 old men who should have been anywhere else. 5 old men who'd volunteered to die in the snow because some kids needed help and nobody else was coming. He thought about Rachel. Thought about 18 dead Marines with their hands bound. Thought about Captain Reeves breaking under the weight of command. Thought about his promise to never see war again. Some promises couldn't be kept. Some promises died the moment someone you loved needed you. He turned to the Marines, the 400 kids who'd been told they were going to die and had started to believe it. His voice cut through the wind in the fear. Listen up. My name is Master Sergeant James Hawkins. I'm 58 years old. I've fought in wars you've only read about. I watched friends die in mud and blood. I swore I'd never see combat again. But here I am. Why? Because Marines don't abandon Marines. He paused. Let them see him, really see him, an old man with gray hair and a body held together by scar tissue and will. You're scared. Good. Fear keeps you alive. You think you're going to die here. Maybe. But not without a fight. For the next 48 hours, I'm going to teach you how to hunt. Not how to survive, how to hunt. Because that's the only way we leave this mountain, by making them fear us. Some of the Marines straightened. Not many, but enough. You're not victims anymore. You're predators. And predators don't die in traps. They break them. Bull stepped forward. Preacher beside him. Murphy limping, but standing tall. Lee with his maps and his intelligence and his quiet certainty. We're 5 old men who should be fishing. But we're here. We're with you. And we're not leaving until every one of you makes it home. The Marines looked at each other. Something passed through them. Not hope exactly. Maybe just the possibility that hope might exist. That dying wasn't certain. That 5 old warriors might know something about survival that West Point hadn't taught Captain Reeves. Hawk pointed to the maps. First we fortify. Turn this camp into a fortress. Then we train. Sniper teams. Ambush tactics. Night operations. Everything you need to make the Iraqis bleed for every feeder. Then we break out. Together, nobody left behind. He looked each Marine in the eye. Tried to burn certainty into them through sheer force of will. You're going to survive this. I promise you that. But you have to trust me. You have to do exactly what I say without question. Can you do that? A corporal near the back spoke up. Young, maybe 20. Sir, why should we trust you? Fair question. Hawk considered it. Considered lying. Considered saying something inspiring. Decided on truth instead. Because my daughter is here. Corporal Rachel Hawkins. Combat medic. She's over there right now trying to save lives with supplies that ran out yesterday. And I will burn this entire country to ash before I let anything happen to her. You're her Marines, that makes you mine. And I take care of mine. The corporal nodded, looked at the men around him. Semper Fi, sir, Semper Fi. Night fell like a curtain. The temperature dropped to -15. Frost formed on beards and eyebrows. Breath came out in clouds. The kind of cold that killed as sure as bullets. Hawk stood at the perimeter, watching darkness, listening for sounds that didn't belong. His rifle was familiar weight in his hands. He hadn't fired it in combat since his last deployment in '91, but muscle memory was permanent. Some things the body never forgot. Bull joined him, stood quiet for a while. 2 old men in the cold remembering when they'd been young. You think we can do this? Hawk didn't answer right away. Honesty was complicated when you were asking men to believe in miracles. I think we try. I think we fight. I think we make them pay for every one of us. Beyond that, who knows? Not very inspiring. Bull grunted, almost laughed. Never said I was a motivational speaker. Said I'd keep them alive. Didn't promise I'd make them feel good about it. Rachel appeared from the darkness. She'd been checking on the wounded. Her hands were clean, but Hawk knew she'd been washing blood off them for hours. Knew she'd held dying kids and lied to them about how everything would be okay. She stood between them, small against the night, strong in ways that had nothing to do with size. The worst cases won't make it through the night. Nothing I can do, not enough supplies, not enough time. Just have to make them comfortable and wait. Her voice was clinical, but Hawk heard the cracks underneath. Heard his daughter breaking under the weight of watching kids die. He put his arm around her. Pulled her close. She leaned into him the way she had when she was 6 and thunderstorms scared her. You're doing everything right. Sometimes everything right isn't enough. That's not your fault. How do you live with it, knowing you did your best and people died anyway? Hawk thought about the wars he'd fought, about the valleys where they'd been pinned, about the Marines he'd watched die despite everything he'd done to save them. You don't live with it. You just keep living anyway. You carry them, everyone, and you try to make sure their deaths meant something. That's all any of us can do. They stood together in the cold, father and daughter, Marine and Marine, connected by blood and uniform and the shared understanding that some things couldn't be fixed, no matter how hard you tried. Behind them, 400 Marines tried to sleep, tried to stay warm, tried to believe that morning would come, and they'd still be alive to see it. Some would be right, some wouldn't. That was war. That was always war. Somewhere in the darkness, an Iraqi soldier looked through a scope and saw American positions and thought about killing, thought about revenge, thought about the highway of death where Americans had slaughtered thousands and called it liberation. Tomorrow, the killing would start fresh. Tomorrow, Hawk would teach Marines how to hunt. Tomorrow, the siege would crack one way or another. But tonight, he held his daughter and watched snowfall and remembered that some things were worth dying for, even when you'd sworn you were done dying. The radio crackled. Static and then a voice. Arabic, Lee translated in real time, his voice flat and professional. Colonel Rashid al-Tikriti to all units. The Americans are weak. Tomorrow we increase pressure. Find their leaders. Kill them first. Especially the old ones who just arrived. Make them watch their children die. The transmission ended. Bull looked at Hawk in the darkness. They know we're here. Hawk nodded, felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear. Something older than fear. Something that came from decades of combat and had never left. Good. Let them come. Let them try. He looked at Rachel, at Bull, at the Marines sleeping fitfully in the cold, at 5 old men who'd volunteered to die so kids could live. Tomorrow the war would begin in earnest. Tomorrow they'd learn if 58 years and bad knees and bodies held together with determination could stand against 300 elite troops who wanted them dead. Tomorrow they'd find out if Marines really never left Marines behind. Tonight they had cold and darkness and the sound of snow falling on a mountain that didn't care who lived or died. Hawk checked his rifle one more time, made sure the magazine was seated, made sure the action was smooth, made sure everything was ready for whatever dawn would bring. Because dawn always came, and dawn always brought blood. That was the only certainty war ever offered. Everything else was just hoping you'd be the one still standing when the sun set again. Dawn came without mercy, the kind of gray light that made the world look like a photograph from a war nobody wanted to remember. Hawk had been awake for 36 hours straight. His body felt like a collection of parts that had forgotten how to work together. Knees screaming, back locked, hands steady only through force of will. 58 years old and every one of those years sitting on his spine like stones. The Marines were already moving. Bull had them organized into fire teams. Training stations scattered through the perimeter. Young faces tight with exhaustion and something that might have been determination if you squinted hard enough. They'd lost hope sometime during the 3rd day of siege. Now they were running on fumes and the distant possibility that 5 old men might know something about staying alive. Preacher had the sniper candidates, 12 Marines who'd qualified marksmen or better. He was teaching them something that couldn't be found in any manual. How to see what wasn't there. How to read shadows and wind and the tiny mistakes that turned good soldiers into dead ones. His voice carried across the snow, soft but absolute. You don't hunt the man, you hunt his habits. Does he smoke? Wait for him to light up. Does he check his watch? Wait for that moment when he's not thinking about dying. Does he trust his cover too much? That's when you take him. One of the Marines raised a hand. Kid named Torres, maybe 22. Eyes that had seen too much already. What if we can't see them at all? Then you make them show themselves. Fire one round into their position, not to kill, to provoke. Men under fire do two things. They return fire or they move. Either way, you've got them. Murphy was teaching demolitions with whatever they could scavenge. Grenade casings, radio batteries, strips of metal from damaged equipment. His hands moved with the confidence of a man who'd built bombs for 40 years and still had all his fingers. Well, most of his fingers. The key is imagination. You don't need C4 when you've got pressure and heat and timing. A grenade becomes 10 grenades if you know how to scatter the fragments. A battery becomes a detonator. A tripwire becomes an ambush that never sleeps. The Marines watched him work. Watched this 60-year-old man with one leg build death from garbage. Some of them were starting to believe. Starting to think that maybe survival wasn't just something that happened to other people. Lee had the intelligence section. 4 Marines who spoke some Arabic. Not fluently, not even well, but enough to understand radio traffic if you gave them time and patience. He was teaching them to think like the enemy, to understand that every decision had a pattern. Every commander had habits. Find the pattern, predict the decision, survive the result. The Iraqis will attack at dawn or dusk, never full light, never full dark. Why? One of the Marines answered. Lance Corporal Chen, 24, smart enough to question orders when questioning kept you breathing. Visibility. They want to see, but don't want us to see clearly. Exactly. So we prepare for those windows. We set our ambushes for those times. We turn their advantage into our trap. Bull had the combat tactics section, teaching Marines how to move, how to fight, how to stay alive when everything was designed to kill you. His voice was gravel and iron. Small units, 3 to 5 men, fast movement, hit and fade. Never stay in one place longer than it takes to kill. Never fight fair if you can fight smart. Never ever assume the enemy is stupider than you. Assume he's smarter and prepare accordingly. A corporal named Davis spoke up. Big kid, built like a linebacker. Face that belonged in a Norman Rockwell painting. Master Sergeant, what do we do if they overrun us? Bull looked at him for a long moment. Let the questions sit there like a live grenade. You make them pay for every meter. You make them remember that killing Marines costs more than they want to spend. And if you're going to die, you die taking as many of them with you as possible. Not because of rage, not because of revenge. Because everyone you kill is one that can't kill your brothers. The morning training went until 1100 hours. Then came the first probe. 20 Iraqi soldiers moving through the valley from the east, testing the perimeter, looking for weak points, looking for fear. They found Preacher instead. He'd positioned himself on a ridgeline with perfect sight lines. 800 meters from the approaching Iraqis. Wind from the northwest at 6 knots. Temperature hovering around 0. Snow falling light enough to see through but heavy enough to matter. His spotter was Torres, the kid who'd asked about hunting invisible men. Now he was learning the answer firsthand. Preacher's voice was a whisper, teaching in real time. Lead man. He's confident. Walking like he owns the ground. That's a mistake. Range 810. Wind right to left. Elevation down 4 degrees. Breathe. Half breath. Hold. The rifle cracked. The sound swallowed by distance and snow. Torres watched through the spotting scope, saw the lead Iraqi drop like someone had cut his strings. Impact. Center mass. He's down. The Iraqi patrol scattered. Professional. Trained. They took cover and started scanning for the shooter. But Preacher had already moved. Shifted 10 meters to a new position. Let them look where he'd been while he lined up the next shot. Second target. The one shouting orders. That's their sergeant. Take him out and they lose cohesion. Range 820. Same wind, adjust 1 mil right. Another crack, another body in the snow. The Iraqis broke, started pulling back. Preacher let them go. Killing wasn't the point. The point was making them afraid. Making them understand that approaching this perimeter had a cost they might not want to pay. Torres was breathing hard, adrenaline and fear mixing into something electric. How did you stay so calm? Preacher settled the rifle. Looked at the kid with eyes that had seen this 1,000 times. Because calm is the only thing between you and panic. Panic gets you killed. Calm gives you a chance. You practice calm like you practice shooting. Eventually it becomes reflex. They move to a new position, always moving, never static. That was survival. That was how you lived to train another batch of kids who needed to learn these lessons in blood and snow. By noon, the Marines had repelled 3 more probes, lost 2 men, killed 17 Iraqis. The math was working in their favor, but math didn't account for ammunition running low and food running out and the cold that never stopped trying to murder everyone equally. Hawk found Rachel in the medical tent. She had 4 critical cases, all gut shots, all dying despite everything she did. Her hands were steady, but her eyes carried the weight of watching kids die while their mothers would never know the truth about how it happened. One of the wounded was conscious. Private First Class Michael Garrett, 19 years old, from some small town in Ohio that probably had a population smaller than this Marine company. He was trying not to scream, failing. The morphine had run out yesterday. Rachel held his hand. Her voice was soft but certain. Michael, listen to me. You're going to make it. I know it hurts. I know you're scared. But you're going to make it because I need you to. Because your mother needs you to. Because the Marines beside you need you to. Understand? Garrett nodded. Believed her because he wanted to. Because hope was all he had left, and hope sounded like Rachel's voice telling him lies that might become true if he believed hard enough. Hawk watched his daughter lie with conviction. Watched her become the thing these kids needed. Not truth, not reality. Just certainty that tomorrow existed and they'd live to see it. She looked up, saw him standing there. Her face was pale, exhausted. Beautiful in the way that suffering makes people beautiful when they refuse to break. I need more supplies, Dad. More morphine, more bandages, more everything. These kids are dying because I don't have the basics. I know, I'm working on it. She nodded, went back to Garrett, back to the lie that kept him breathing. Hawk walked away before she could see his face, before she could see that he didn't know how to get supplies, didn't know how to make any of this better, didn't know anything except that his daughter was watching kids die and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Bull found him at the perimeter, staring into the trees like they might have answers. We need to talk about the defector. Hawk had been avoiding that conversation, avoiding the man they were supposedly dying to protect, avoiding the question of whether one life was worth 100. They found Dr. Khalid al-Rashid in a tent near the command post, 53 years old, gray hair, soft hands, the hands of a man who'd spent his life thinking instead of doing. He looked terrified, the kind of terror that came from understanding exactly how precarious his survival was. Captain Reeves was there. He'd been better since yesterday. Not good, not confident, but functional. Sometimes functional was enough. Dr. al-Rashid, these are the advisors I told you about. The scientist stood, offered his hand. Hawk shook it. The hand was soft, trembling. The hand of a man who'd never held a weapon and couldn't imagine the violence keeping him alive. Thank you for coming. I know the cost. I know Marines have died for me. I want you to understand that what I carry is worth that cost. Hawk didn't sit, didn't make this comfortable. Tell me about these nuclear secrets. Tell me why 18 kids are in the snow with their hands bound and bullets in their heads. Al-Rashid flinched, the image hitting him like a physical blow. Saddam was pursuing nuclear weapons. I was part of that program. I know the facilities, the scientists, the progress. If I reach American intelligence, we can stop him before he builds a bomb. Bull stepped forward. His voice was flat, dangerous. Cut the shit. Saddam's nuclear program was bombed to rubble in the first week. Everybody knows that. So what are you really carrying that's worth this many lives? The scientist looked at Reeves, at Hawk, at the 2 old warriors who'd seen enough lies to recognize them on sight. He sat, deflated, the truth weighing him down. You're right, there is no nuclear program. Hasn't been for years. What I have is documentation, evidence, proof that American companies sold chemical weapons to Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War. Proof that your government knew about chemical attacks and said nothing. Proof that would destroy careers and reputations and maybe governments. The tent went silent. Outside, Marines were training, fighting, dying. Inside, 3 men were learning that sometimes the lies were bigger than the war. Hawk felt something cold settle in his chest. Colder than the snow, colder than the wind, the cold that came from understanding you'd been used. So this whole mission, the Marines, the siege, all of it is just to bury evidence? The CIA wants me dead or silent. Same thing. Your Pentagon wants the evidence destroyed. Your State Department wants me to disappear. Only a few people in your government actually want the truth. They arranged this extraction, but the others found out. And now you're here, dying to protect secrets that should have been buried years ago. Bull looked at Hawk. Neither man spoke. Both understood what this meant. They'd been sent to die, not to save a defector, not to stop nuclear weapons, but to be martyrs in someone else's cover-up. Acceptable losses in a war that had nothing to do with terrorism or freedom or any of the words politicians used when they sent kids to die. Reeves looked like he might vomit. I knew. They told me before we left, said the mission parameters were classified, said some of us wouldn't make it back, but it was necessary for national security. I thought they meant the nuclear threat was real. I thought we were heroes. His voice broke on the last word. Hawk wanted to hit him, wanted to hurt him the way he'd hurt by staying silent while Marines died for lies. But violence wouldn't change anything. Violence never did. So you were going to let 480 Marines die? Reeves looked at his hands, couldn't meet Hawk's eyes. I didn't know how to say no. I'm a captain. I follow orders. That's what we do. That's what they teach you. Follow orders even when you don't understand, even when it feels wrong, because the people giving orders know more than you. See the bigger picture. Have information you don't. Bull's voice was quiet, lethal. The bigger picture is 18 kids in the snow with bullets in their heads. The bigger picture is 100 more who might die before this is over. The bigger picture is your own daughter watching the life drain out of teenagers while you stood here and said nothing. Reeves broke, actually broke, started crying like a child. All the academy training, all the tactical knowledge, all the leadership courses, none of it prepared him for this. For the moment when you realized you'd been complicit in murder. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do. I still don't know what to do. Hawk looked at al-Rashid, at this soft-handed man with secrets that had killed good soldiers. Can you prove it? Can you prove what you're claiming? The scientist nodded, pulled a small waterproof case from inside his jacket. Inside were microfilm cartridges, documents reduced to specs, evidence compressed into something that could fit in a pocket and destroy a government. Everything. Sales receipts, shipping manifests, memos from defense contractors, photos of delivery, all of it. Enough to start investigations that would reach the highest levels of your government. Bull picked up the case, held it like it was a live grenade. This is what they're killing us for, a few pieces of film, not film, truth. The kind of truth that ends careers and starts trials. The kind that makes people desperate. Desperate enough to sacrifice Marines, desperate enough to stage an ambush and blame it on Iraqi forces. Desperate enough to do anything to make sure this never sees daylight. Hawk felt the weight of it, felt the decision forming. He looked at Bull, at Reeves, at the scientist who'd brought this poison into their lives. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to get every Marine out of here. Every one. We're going to fight through whatever we have to fight through. And when we reach Turkey, we're not handing you over to CIA handlers. We're holding a press conference. We're putting this evidence in front of every camera and reporter we can find. And we're making damn sure the world knows what happened here. Reeves looked up, hope and fear mixing on his face. They'll court-martial us. All of us. They'll bury us. Then we get buried telling the truth. Better than dying for lies. Bull nodded, no hesitation, no doubt. I'm in, always have been. Hawk turned to al-Rashid. You brought this here. You're responsible for every death, every wound, every kid crying for his mother. You're going to survive this, and you're going to testify. You're going to stand in front of the world and tell them what you know. And if you even think about running or changing your story, I will personally hunt you down and finish what the Iraqis started. We clear? Al-Rashid nodded, terrified but understanding that survival came with conditions now. Crystal clear. The tent flap opened. Lee stepped in. His face was tight. The expression that meant bad news was about to get worse. Intercepted radio traffic. Colonel Rashid al-Takriti is personally taking command. He's bringing 200 additional troops. Says he has unfinished business here. Says there's an old debt to settle. Hawk felt ice in his veins. The name, the memory. 20 years old and covered in mud in a jungle on the other side of the world. A young Iraqi volunteer with hate in his eyes and fear underneath. Hawk had let him go. Had made a choice that mercy mattered even in war. Now that mercy was coming back with interest. Bull saw his face. You know this guy? Long time ago. Different war. I made a choice. Now we pay for it. That wasn't enough explanation, but Bull didn't push. You learned to trust that some stories had teeth. Some memories bit when you touched them. Better to leave them alone until they mattered. How much time do we have? Lee checked his notes. 12 hours. Maybe less if they force march. They're coming from the south, the route we'd planned to use for extraction. So we're boxed in. North is cliff face. East and west are Iraqi positions. South is about to be a wall of troops. Perfect. Murphy limped in. His face was gray. Pain cutting through the stoicism. The ankle was worse. Infection starting, maybe. Or just the body finally admitting it was too old for this. I've got good news and bad news. Hit us with the good news first. I've rigged 20 positions with improvised explosives, tripwires, pressure plates, remote detonation. When they come, they're going to lose at least 30 before they even know they're in a fight. And the bad news? I used all our spare parts. No more tricks after this. We get one ambush, one big surprise. After that, we're back to rifles and whatever God provides. Hawk nodded, ran numbers in his head. Math that didn't quite work, but was all they had. Okay, new plan. We don't wait for them to reinforce. We hit them first. Tonight, kill their leadership. Break their cohesion. Make them think twice about pushing us. Reeves found his voice. That's insane. We're outnumbered 3-1 already. Attacking just splits our forces and gets more people killed. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only move they won't expect. Maybe attacking is the last thing they think we're capable of. Maybe that's enough. Bull was already thinking tactically. You could see it in his eyes, the gears turning, the possibilities mapping. How many do we send? 20. Best fighters we have. Fast, quiet, in and out before they know what hit them. And the defector stays here with the main force, protected. If we die, someone else finishes the mission. If we succeed, we've bought time for the whole unit to break south. Who leads the raid? Hawk looked at Bull, at Murphy, at Preacher who just walked in, at Lee with his maps and intelligence and quiet competence, at Rachel who stood in the entrance, covered in blood that wasn't hers, eyes that had stopped believing in sleep. We do. The 5 of us and 15 Marines. We're going to walk into their headquarters and kill Colonel Rashid al-Takriti. We're going to cut the head off this snake and watch the body die. Rachel stepped forward. I'm going with you. No, I'm the second best shot in this unit. I can move quiet. I can think under pressure. And I'm not letting you walk into death without me. Hawk wanted to say no, wanted to order her to stay, wanted to protect her the way fathers protect daughters. But she was right. She was good. Maybe good enough to make the difference between success and failure. And he'd taught her to shoot, taught her to think, taught her everything he knew about survival. Sending her into danger felt like failure, but keeping her back when she could help felt like betrayal. Bull spoke quietly. Let her come. She's earned it. Hawk looked at his daughter, saw the woman she'd become, saw the Marine standing where his little girl used to be. Stay close. Follow orders. If I tell you to run, you run. No arguments, no hesitation. Understood? Understood. They spent the afternoon preparing. Weapons checked and rechecked, ammunition counted, routes memorized, and contingencies planned for everything they could imagine and some things they couldn't. Preacher gathered the 15 Marines who'd volunteered. Young faces trying to look hard. Eyes that showed their age no matter how tough they pretended to be. His voice was soft but carried weight that had nothing to do with volume. Tonight you're going to see things. Do things. Things you'll remember for the rest of your lives. Some of you won't make it back. That's truth. But the ones who do will know they did something that mattered. They saved lives by taking them. They fought not because they wanted to, but because they had to. There's honor in that. Remember that when things get bad. They moved out at 1900 hours. 20 Marines, 5 old warriors, one mission that would probably kill them all. The snow had stopped, but the cold remained. Breath came out in clouds. Hands went numb inside gloves. The kind of cold that made you slow. Made you stupid if you weren't careful. Hawk moved on point with Bull. 2 old men who'd done this dance before. Reading terrain by moonlight and memory. Avoiding the obvious routes. Taking the hard path because hard paths kept you alive. Rachel was 3 back. Moving like she'd been doing this for years. Quiet, professional. Hawk kept checking on her. Couldn't help it. Father's instinct overriding tactical sense. Bull caught him looking and shook his head. Trust her or get her killed. No middle ground. They reached the Iraqi position at 2100 hours, a cluster of tents in a valley, fires burning, guards posted but lazy, confident. They'd been winning for 3 days, why worry now? Murphy had crawled ahead, set charges at 3 key points, waited for the signal. His hands worked in the darkness, building death from wire and prayer and 40 years of practice. Preacher had eyes on the command tent, could see shadows moving inside, could see the silhouette of a man pointing at maps. Colonel Rashid al-Takriti, the ghost from Hawk's past, the mercy that had come back as violence. The signal came. 3 clicks on the radio. Murphy pressed the detonator. The night exploded, fire and shrapnel and bodies flying, screaming, confusion. The kind of chaos that turns soldiers into targets and targets into casualties. Hawk's team moved, fast, professional, killing as they went. Not with pleasure, not with rage, just with the cold efficiency of people who'd learned that hesitation got you killed. Rachel was beside him. Her rifle barked 3 times, 3 bodies dropped. She moved like water, like smoke, like she'd been born doing this. Hawk felt pride and horror mixing into something he couldn't name. They reached the command tent. Bull kicked the door. Inside were 8 men, maps, radio equipment, the architecture of command. Rashid stood in the center, 51 years old, scarred face, eyes that recognized Hawk immediately. For a moment, nobody moved. 2 old men staring at each other across 20 years and 10,000 miles. The Vietnamese jungle where mercy had meant something. This Iraqi valley where mercy was just another way to die. Rashid smiled, actually smiled. The American who spared me. James Hawkins. I wondered if you'd remember. I remember. I promised I would repay the debt or kill you. There is no middle. You chose which by coming here. His hand moved toward a pistol. Preacher shot him. Clean, professional, center mass. Rashid went down hard, blood spreading across maps that showed American positions, American deaths, American failure. The other Iraqis moved, reaching for weapons, dying as they moved. The tent became a killing box, quick, brutal, over in seconds that felt like hours. When the silence came, it was deafening. 8 bodies, 1 debt paid in the worst possible way. Hawk stood over Rashid, watched the light fade from eyes that had seen too much war. Eyes that looked like his own in ways that made his chest hurt. Rashid's lips moved, blood on his teeth, words coming hard. We were the same, you and I. Warriors who tried to be more, who wanted mercy to matter. But war makes mercy weakness, makes kindness fatal. You should have killed me, would have been kinder. His hand reached up, not for a weapon, just reaching. Maybe for meaning, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for nothing. Then he was gone. Another ghost to carry, another choice to live with, another piece of mercy turned to regret. Rachel appeared at Hawk's side. Her face was spattered with blood. Her eyes were different now, harder, older. She'd killed tonight, multiple times, crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Dad, we need to move. He nodded, couldn't speak yet, couldn't process what they'd done, what he'd done, what they'd all become in the name of survival. They fought their way out, killed 17 more Iraqis, lost 2 Marines. Corporal Davis took a round to the throat, died choking on blood and snow while his friends dragged him away because nobody left anybody. Not ever, not for anything. Private Chen took shrapnel to the gut. Murphy tried to stop the bleeding. Couldn't. Watched the kid die anyway. Watched another family get a flag and a lie about how their child died a hero. By over 200 hours, they were back at the Marine perimeter. 13 returned, 7 didn't. The math of violence, the cost of living, the price paid in young bodies so old men could call it victory. Bull found Hawk at the perimeter. Dawn was maybe 3 hours away. Time enough to sleep if sleep was something that still happened. It wasn't. Rashid is dead. His staff is dead. The Iraqis are in chaos. We bought maybe 24 hours. Enough time to move. Enough time to run. Hawk nodded, felt nothing. The coldness that came after violence, the empty space where feelings used to be. Rachel hasn't spoken since we got back. Bull's voice carried worry, the kind you heard in fathers, in old warriors who'd seen what killing did to people, especially young people, especially the first time. I'll talk to her. He found Rachel sitting alone, staring at her hands. They were clean now. She'd washed them. But Hawk knew she could still see the blood, could still feel it, would feel it for years, maybe forever. He sat beside her, didn't say anything. Sometimes silence was the only kindness you could offer. She spoke first. Her voice was small, young, the voice of the girl he'd raised before the Marines turned her into something else. "I killed 3 men tonight, Dad. I looked at them through my scope, and I pulled the trigger, and they fell. Just like that. 1 second they were alive, thinking, feeling. The next they were nothing. And I did that. I made them nothing." Tears came, silent. She didn't sob, didn't break down, just cried the way soldiers cry. Quiet, ashamed, like emotions were weakness. Hawk put his arm around her, held her the way he had when she was 6 and the world was simpler. I know it hurts. I know you keep seeing their faces. I know you wonder if they had families, if someone loved them, if killing them made you a monster." She looked at him, eyes desperate for absolution he couldn't give. "Does it get easier? No, it gets heavier, everyone. But you learn to carry it. You learn that sometimes killing is the only way to protect. That sometimes there are no good choices, just choices you can live with and choices you can't." Rachel leaned into him, small against the night, strong in ways that had nothing to do with size or muscle or training. "I don't want to carry this forever. You won't carry it alone. I'm here. Always. We'll carry it together." They sat in the cold and watched the sky lighten toward dawn. Father and daughter, Marine and Marine, connected by blood and uniform and the shared weight of violence that would never fully wash away. Somewhere in the valley, dead Iraqis cooled in the snow. Somewhere, Colonel Rashid al-Tikriti's last words echoed in memory. Somewhere, Mercy had died and become just another casualty of war. But here, now, in this moment, a father held his daughter and made silent promises that he'd help her stay human despite everything war demanded. Because that was all anyone could do. Stay human, stay kind, stay capable of grief. Even when the world said soldiers shouldn't feel. Even when the mission said emotions were weakness. Even when everything else turned to ash and ice. Tomorrow they would run. Tomorrow they would fight again. Tomorrow more kids would die and more ghosts would follow them home. But tonight there was this, a moment of quiet, a moment of humanity, a moment that said, despite everything, some things still mattered. And sometimes that had to be enough. The Iraqi counterattack came at dawn, fast, brutal, the kind of coordinated assault that said someone competent had taken command after Rashid died. Someone who understood that revenge was a dish best served with overwhelming force and no mercy. 200 troops hit the eastern perimeter. Mortars first, then rockets, then waves of infantry that kept coming even when the Marines cut them down. An attack that traded bodies for ground without caring about the arithmetic of death. Hawk was on the line when the first mortar round landed, 30 meters out, close enough to feel the concussion in his chest, close enough to taste copper and cordite. He dove for cover. 58 years old and his body moved on instinct, built from wars that should have been forgotten. Bull was beside him, screaming orders that barely carried over the explosions, organizing fire teams, directing the defense, turning chaos into something resembling control if you squinted hard enough. The Marines were holding, barely. The training from yesterday was paying dividends measured in enemy bodies and friendly survivors. Preacher's sniper teams were picking off officers. Murphy's improvised explosives were turning assault routes into meat grinders. But the pressure kept building. It was never enough when the enemy had numbers and time and a willingness to spend both. Rachel was in the medical tent, working on a kid who'd taken shrapnel to the face. His right eye was gone, just gone. She was trying to stop the bleeding, trying to save enough of him that he'd have something left when this was over. If this was ever over. Hawk could see her through the smoke, see her hands moving with desperate efficiency, see her face locked in that expression that said she'd stopped feeling and was just doing. The survival mechanism that kept medics functional when everything else said to break down and scream. A Marine next to Hawk took a round through the throat, went down gurgling, trying to breathe through a hole that wasn't designed for air. Hawk grabbed him, applied pressure, tried to do what Rachel would do, but he wasn't Rachel, wasn't trained for this. The kid died while Hawk held him, eyes wide, surprised, like death was something that happened to other people until it happened to you. The assault lasted 40 minutes, felt like years. When it finally broke, the Iraqis pulled back, left 60 bodies in the snow. The Marines had lost 12, wounded 20 more. The math still favored them, but math didn't account for morale, for exhaustion, for the slow certainty that numbers always won eventually. Hawk found Bull at the command post. Reeves was there too, looking more competent now. Fear had burned away the indecision. Sometimes that's what fear did, made you functional or killed you. No middle ground. Casualty report came in. 31 dead since yesterday, 74 wounded, ammunition down to 15%, food completely gone, water from melted snow tasting like dirt in desperation. The numbers that said they had maybe 24 hours before they stopped being a fighting force and became just a target. We need to move. Now, tonight, before they regroup and hit us again. Bull nodded, already thinking routes, already calculating distance and terrain and the 1,000 variables that meant life or death. South is blocked. Rashid's reinforcements are between us and Turkey. We'd have to fight through 800 troops. Then we go around, through the mountains, the route nobody would expect because it's suicide. Bull looked at the map, at the ridgeline that rose 3,000 feet, at the passes marked with red X's that meant impassable in winter, at the terrain that would kill them as efficiently as bullets. We'd lose people. Frostbite, hypothermia, falls. The wounded won't make it. They won't make it here either. At least on the move, we have a chance. Reeves spoke up, his voice steadier now, the voice of someone who'd decided to be useful or die trying. I'll organize the movement. We can break into 3 columns. Stagger departure so we don't present one target. Move at night, rest during day in whatever cover we can find. Hawk almost smiled. Almost. The captain was learning, growing into command under fire. Sometimes that's what it took. Watching people die because you failed made you either better or broken. Reeves was choosing better. Lee appeared from the intelligence section. His face was gray, pain from frostbite, from exhaustion, from the weight of being 57 and pretending his body could do what it did at 27. Intercepted more radio traffic. The Iraqis know their commander is dead. They're pulling forces from the south, consolidating. Whoever's in charge now is smart, methodical. He's not rushing, he's setting conditions for a final assault that leaves no survivors. How long do we have? 12 hours, maybe 18 if we're lucky. After that, they'll have us completely surrounded with forces we can't fight through. Then we leave in 6 hours, as soon as it's dark enough to move without being seen. Murphy limped in. His face was the color of old paper. The ankle was infected. Hawk could smell it. The sweet rot smell that had said antibiotics or amputation, and they didn't have either. I've got one more trick, one last big boom, but I need to stay behind to trigger it. Delay them long enough for the main force to get clear. No, nobody stays behind. We all go, or none of us go. Murphy smiled, actually smiled, the expression of a man who'd made his peace. Hawk, I'm 60 years old. I've got one leg. The other one is turning septic. I'm slowing you down. I know it. You know it. The math is simple. One life to buy time for 400. That's a trade I can live with. Well, die with. But you know what I mean. Hawk wanted to argue, wanted to order him to come, wanted to do anything except accept that sometimes the math was cruel and clear and unavoidable. Bull put his hand on Murphy's shoulder. No words, just the grip that said everything that needed saying. Brothers in arms, brothers in death. The bond that survived everything except the end. Preacher stepped forward, his quiet voice somehow cutting through the tension. I'll stay with him. 2 triggers better than 1. 2 old men making sure the young ones get home. That's not sacrifice, that's duty. Murphy nodded, looked at Preacher with something like gratitude. Appreciate the company, Preacher. Gets lonely dying alone. Hawk felt something crack in his chest. The thing that had been holding him together. 2 more ghosts to carry. 2 more names to remember. 2 more reasons to make sure the rest survived. Rachel appeared at the tent entrance. Her face was hollow. Eyes that had seen too much death and weren't done seeing it yet. The critical cases won't survive the movement. They need surgery, antibiotics, things we don't have. I can keep them comfortable, make sure they don't hurt, but I can't save them. How many? 8, maybe 10 if some of the marginal cases turn bad. Hawk did the math. Cold math, brutal math, the kind that commanders had to do and live with forever. We take everyone who can walk or be carried. The ones who can't, we make comfortable. Leave them morphine, leave them dignity. Come back for them when we can. If we can, Rachel said softly. If we can. She nodded, understood, hated it but understood it. Sometimes survival meant choices that destroyed part of your soul. Sometimes you had to accept that saving some meant abandoning others. Sometimes war made you complicit in horrors you'd spend the rest of your life trying to justify. The next 6 hours were preparation. Weapons checked, ammunition distributed, the wounded assessed and sorted into those who could move and those who couldn't. The math of triage applied to humans, and somehow that was worse than applying it to supplies. Private Garrett was among those who couldn't move, the gut-shot kid Rachel had been treating. He was conscious, knew what being left behind meant, tried to smile anyway. It's okay, Doc. I'm tired. Been tired for days. Maybe it's time to rest. Rachel held his hand. Her voice was steady, but Hawk could see the cracks underneath. You're the bravest person I've ever met, Michael. Your mother is going to be so proud. Tell her I wasn't scared. Even if it's a lie, tell her I was brave. You are brave. You're the bravest. She stayed with him until he slept. Then she walked to where Hawk was organizing the movement. Her face was stone, the face of someone who'd learned to lock feelings away in a box marked open later or never. I hate this. I hate leaving them. I hate being a medic who can't save people. I hate all of it. I know, I hate it too, but we do it anyway because the alternative is worse. What's worse than abandoning dying kids? Letting all 400 die trying to save 8 who won't make it anyway. That's the math. That's the choice, and it's not fair and it's not right, but it's reality. Rachel looked at him with eyes that carried accusations she didn't voice. Looked at him like he was part of the machine that created this situation. The machine that sent kids to die for lies and called it duty. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was. Maybe they all were. Complicit in a system that ground up young lives and spit out flags and medals and empty words about honor. But right now, the only thing that mattered was getting the survivors out. Making sure some mothers got their kids back. Making sure some families didn't get that knock on the door. Making sure the math favored life over death even in tiny increments. Darkness came early in the mountains. The kind of winter darkness that was absolute. No moon, no stars. Just black and cold, and the sound of 400 Marines trying to move quietly through snow. They broke into 3 columns like Reeves suggested. Staggered departure. Bull leading the first group, Reeves the second. Hawk bringing up the rear with Rachel and the last of the wounded. Murphy and Preacher stayed behind. 2 old warriors in a perimeter that was about to become a tomb. They'd rigged the camp with every explosive they could make, turned it into one massive trap. When the Iraqis came, they'd find death waiting. Hawk stood with them before leaving. No words seemed adequate. No goodbye felt sufficient for men who were choosing to die so others could live. Murphy broke the silence. Tell my wife I love her. Tell her I did my job. Tell her it mattered. I will. Preacher was quiet, just nodded. His eyes said everything. Peace, acceptance, the calm that came from knowing your purpose and fulfilling it. Hawk saluted, sharp, crisp, the kind of salute that meant respect and grief and all the things that couldn't be spoken. They returned it, 3 old men acknowledging what was about to happen, what had to happen. Then Hawk turned and walked away. Didn't look back. Looking back made it harder. Looking back made you reconsider. Looking back got people killed. The mountain route was hell. Steep slopes covered in ice. Paths that disappeared into nothing. Wind that cut through every layer and found skin. Temperature dropping to -20. Cold that stopped being physical and became existential. Cold that made you question whether living was worth the effort. Marines fell, slipped on ice, went over edges into darkness. Screams that got swallowed by wind. Bodies that wouldn't be recovered until spring if ever. The mountain taking its tribute, adding to the count of the dead. Rachel was beside Hawk, helping carry a Marine with a broken leg. Kid named Foster. 19 years old, trying not to cry from pain but failing. They'd given him the last of the morphine. Wasn't enough, would never be enough. The column moved in silence except for the wind. No talking, no light. Just 400 people trying not to die while a mountain tried its best to kill them. 4 hours in, the explosion started. Behind them, at the camp, Murphy and Preacher's last stand. The sound carried across the valley. Rolled like thunder, kept going. 5 minutes of continuous detonation that said the Iraqis had walked into the trap and paid full price. Then silence. The Marines stopped, looked back, knowing what that silence meant. knowing two old warriors had just bought them time with blood. Some of them cried. Some just stood in the cold and felt it. The weight of survival, the guilt that came from living when others didn't. Hawk didn't stop, kept moving, kept the column going. Grief was for later. Grief was for when you weren't still trying not to die. Right now was for walking, for breathing, for making sure Murphy and Preacher's sacrifice meant something. They reached a plateau at dawn, a flat section of mountain that offered temporary shelter from the wind. Hawk called a halt. 2 hours rest. Eat whatever snow you could melt. Check your feet for frostbite. Stay alive long enough to move again. Bull found him at this edge of the plateau, looking back at the valley, at the smoke rising from where the camp had been, where Murphy and Preacher had made their stand. They went out like warriors. Best way to go. Still went out. Still dead. Still 2 more names to carry. Bull was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the weight of 40 years of seeing friends die. You know what Murphy said to me yesterday? Said he'd lived 60 good years. Said he'd seen his kids grow up, seen grandkids born, done things he was proud of. Said if he had to die, might as well be doing something that mattered. Might as well be protecting kids who hadn't lived 60 years yet, hadn't seen their kids, hadn't done the things that made life worth living. Doesn't make it hurt less. No, but it makes it mean something. And meaning is all we've got when the math stops working. Lee appeared, moving slow. His face was almost black from frostbite, fingers swollen. Hawk knew without asking that he was dying. The body giving up, shutting down systems that weren't critical, conserving energy for a heart that wouldn't beat much longer. Intercepted one last transmission before the radio battery died. Turkish border is 45 kilometers south, but there's a problem. There's always a problem. The Iraqis have a blocking force at the main pass. 200 troops, dug in, waiting. They know where we're going. They'll be ready. Can we go around? Lee unfolded a map with hands that barely worked, pointed to terrain that looked impossible. There's a goat trail. Here, it's not on most maps. Locals use it in summer, never in winter. Too dangerous, too steep. But it bypasses the pass completely. Comes out 3 kilometers from the border. What's the catch? It's a knife edge, literally. Ridge so narrow you can't walk it normal. Have to sidle. One side is a 1,000-foot drop. Other side is worse, and it's exposed, no cover. If they see us, we're target practice. Bull studied the map, did the math that was always brutal and always necessary. How many do we lose on that trail? Honestly, maybe 50. Falls, heart attacks from the altitude, panic. But it's 50 versus fighting through 200 entrenched troops, which cost us probably 200. Math says the trail. Math says a lot of things. Doesn't make them right. Hawk looked at the Marines scattered across the plateau. Kids trying to sleep in the snow. Kids checking weapons with hands that could barely grip. Kids who'd aged decades and days and still had decades left to age if they could just survive the next 24 hours. We take the trail, move at night, rope people together so if one falls, the others can hold. Slow and careful. Make it to Turkey by dawn. Lee nodded, started to say something, collapsed instead. Just went down like someone had cut his strings. Bull caught him, lowered him gentle to the snow. His pulse was thready, breathing shallow, the body finally giving up after asking it to do too much for too long. 57 years old and dying on a mountain because some kids needed to get home. Rachel appeared, knelt beside Lee, checked vitals with practiced efficiency. Her face went tight. Severe hypothermia. Frostbite gone systemic. Multiple organ failure starting. He needs a hospital, needs it now. We're 45 kilometers from the border. Can he make it? No. The word hung there. Final. Absolute. The kind of diagnosis that left no room for hope or bargaining or any of the things people did when confronted with death. Lee's eyes opened, focused on Hawk with effort that cost him everything. Go. Don't wait. Don't carry me. Just go. His voice was barely a whisper. Hawk leaned close to hear. Tell my wife I was thinking about her. Tell her the last thing I saw was beautiful. Mountains and snow and sky. Tell her I wasn't alone. That's important. Tell her I wasn't alone. I will. Lee smiled, closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, then stopped. Just stopped. Like a machine running out of power. Simple. Final. 3 old warriors down. 2 left. The math of attrition applied to friendship, and somehow that was the cruelest math of all. They buried him shallow, couldn't spare the time or energy for proper. Just covered him with snow and stones and said words that felt inadequate. Preacher would have done it better, would have found meaning in death that made it bearable. But Preacher was gone, and they were left with silence, in the wind, and the weight of another ghost. The Marines moved out 2 hours later, rested as much as possible, which wasn't much at all. The trail Lee had described was worse than Hawk imagined, a ridgeline so narrow that you had to turn sideways. Put your back against one cliff face an inch along. Try not to look down at the drop that promised instant death if you lost focus for even a second. They roped together in groups of 10. If one person fell, 9 others would hold. That was the theory. The reality was if someone panicked and pulled hard enough, they'd all go over. The math of collective survival built on trust and hope and physics that didn't always work out. Hawk was in the first group with Rachel, setting the pace, showing it could be done, his back pressed against stone, feet shuffling sideways, arms spread for balance. Every step was negotiation with gravity and fear. Rachel was behind him, breathing hard, trying not to look down, failing. He could hear her hyperventilating, the edge of panic that made people do stupid things. Rachel, look at me, not down, me. She looked up, eyes wide, terrified. You're doing fine. Just keep moving, one step, then another. Don't think about the drop. Don't think about anything except the next step. Dad, I can't. I'm going to fall. You're not going to fall. I'm right here. I won't let you fall. A lie. If she fell, there was nothing he could do. But lies sometimes saved lives when truth just paralyzed. She kept moving, step by step, inch by inch, 60 meters of trail that took 40 minutes and felt like hours. Behind them, the column followed. Some Marines made it look easy. Some were crying, some were praying. One froze completely, locked up with fear. His squad mates talked him through it, inch by inch. The brotherhood that said nobody gets left even when leaving them would be easier. Then someone fell. A Marine near the back, kid named Williams, 20 years old, lost his footing, went over the edge. The rope caught him, jerked hard. The 9 Marines he was connected to slammed into the cliff face, held, barely. They pulled him back up, took 15 minutes. Every second was agony. Every second Williams dangled over nothing and wondered if the rope would hold or if this was how he died, screaming into darkness that didn't care. When they got him back up, he was sobbing, couldn't stop. The fear had broken something inside. Bull held him, let him cry, told him it was okay. That fear meant you were human, and human was allowed. The column kept moving, lost 2 more to falls. Marines who slipped and pulled hard enough that the rope broke or their grip failed, or physics decided that today they died and tomorrow belonged to someone else. Their screams echoed, then stopped, then became memory. 400 started the trail. 398 came off it. Math that said survival had a cost, and the cost was counted in bodies and grief, and the certain knowledge that you'd been lucky while others hadn't. They reached flat ground at 0400 hours, 42 kilometers from the Turkish border. Close enough to taste, close enough to believe, close enough that hope became dangerous because hope made you careless, and careless got you killed. Hawk called a halt, last rest before the final push. Marines collapsed where they stood, too exhausted to care about snow or cold or anything except stopping. Bull and Hawk stood watch. 2 old men who'd somehow survived when 3 others hadn't. 2 old men who felt every year and every scar and every ghost. We're going to make it, actually going to make it. Bull's voice carried disbelief, like he'd stopped believing days ago and reality was surprising him. Maybe. Still got 42 kilometers. Still got Iraqis between us and safety. Still got 100 ways to die. Always the optimist. Someone has to be realistic. You're too busy hoping. Bull almost laughed. Almost. But laughter felt wrong with Murphy and Preacher and lay dead. With Marines buried in snow. With everything they'd lost to get here. What do we do when we get across? When we're safe? When we have to explain why 398 came back and 82 didn't? We tell the truth, show the evidence, make sure everyone knows what happened here. Make sure Murphy and Preacher and Lee didn't die for nothing. And if they bury us, if they court-martial us, if they make us the scapegoats, then we get buried telling the truth. Better than living with lies. Rachel joined them, Her face was drawn, exhausted beyond anything Hawk had seen. She'd been a medic for 72 hours straight, watching kids die, doing math that traded lives for time, becoming something harder than she'd been and softer in ways that would break her later. The wounded are stable, for now, but when we move again, we'll lose more. The ones hanging on by will, and nothing else. They won't make it 42 kilometers. How many? Maybe 20, maybe more. Hard to say. Bodies are unpredictable when you push them this hard. Hawk nodded, added it to the count. The running tally of the dead and dying, the scoreboard that said survival was measured in percentages, and percentages were measured in bodies. Dawn was coming, great light touching the peaks, making the world visible again, making them visible again. They needed to move before full light, before the Iraqis could spot them, before the final kilometers became the killing ground. Bull organized the column, 398 Marines who'd survived impossible odds and weren't done surviving yet. They moved south, toward Turkey, toward safety, toward the end of a mission that had cost too much and taught too many lessons written in blood. The border fence appeared through the morning haze, chain link, concertina wire, guard towers, the most beautiful thing Hawk had ever seen. The line between war and peace, between dying and living, between then and now. Turkish guards saw them coming, raised weapons, unsure. 400 armed Marines approaching your border looked like invasion, looked like threat, looked like a dozen things that required defensive response. Reeves stepped forward, hands up, unarmed. The captain who'd grown into command through failure and fire and the death of everyone who trusted him to be better. We're United States Marines. We're seeking emergency refuge. We have wounded. We have dead. We need help. The Turkish commander appeared, an older man, maybe 50. He'd seen war, recognized what was walking toward him. Refugees, survivors, people who'd earned the right to stop running. Come, all of you. We'll get medical care for the wounded, food, water, shelter. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign, felt like something from another language, something Hawk had forgotten the meaning of. But it sounded right, sounded like maybe the dying could stop. Maybe the math could pause. Maybe they'd earned a moment of peace in the middle of endless war. The Marines crossed the border, one by one. 398 people who'd started as 480. Who'd lost Murphy and Preacher and Lee and 79 others. Who carried ghosts and scars and the certain knowledge that some things could never be left behind. Hawk was last across, Bull beside him, Rachel between them. 3 people who'd gone into hell and come out changed, harder, softer, broken in ways that wouldn't show until later when the adrenaline faded and the grief arrived. He looked back at Iraq, at the mountains where his friends had died, where kids had learned that war was nothing like the recruiting posters, where mercy had turned to regret and choices had turned to ghosts, and somehow they'd survived anyway. Bull put his hand on his shoulder. We made it, brother. Most of us. Most is better than none. Doesn't feel better. No, but give it time. Maybe it will. Maybe we'll learn to live with what we did and what we lost. Maybe that's all survival is, learning to live with it. Rachel took Hawk's hand, small hand, strong grip, the hand of his daughter who'd become a woman and a warrior and something he didn't fully recognize anymore. Thank you for coming, Dad. Thank you for not leaving us. Anytime, always. Marines don't leave Marines. They walked toward the Turkish base, toward medical care and hot food in the beginning of whatever came next. Behind them, the sun rose over mountains that had tried to kill them and failed. The light-painted snow and stone in colors that made everything look clean, pure, like the blood had never existed, like the dead weren't still lying where they fell. But Hawk knew better, knew that appearances lied, knew that some stain went deeper than surface, knew that he'd carry those mountains for the rest of his life, carry Murphy's last words, carry Preacher's quiet courage, carry Lee's final smile, carry every Marine who didn't make it out. The price of survival, the weight of living when others didn't, the burden that said your life had to mean something now because it was built on their deaths. 398 Marines had crossed the border. 398 ghosts walked with them. The math that said the dead never really leave. They just change address, take up residence in your memory, in your dreams, in the moments when you're alone and the world goes quiet and you remember. Remember faces. Remember names. Remember the moment they stopped being alive and became something else, something you carried, something that made you who you were, whether you wanted to be that person or not. Hawk looked at Bull, at Rachel, at the Marines streaming into safety, at the beginning of whatever story came after survival, after war, after the moment when you stopped running and started dealing with what running had cost. The reckoning was coming. The questions about what happened and why and who was responsible. The investigation that would try to bury truth and protect lies. The fight that would determine whether Murphy and Preacher and Lee had died for something or nothing. But that was tomorrow's war. Today was for rest, for healing, for letting the body stop screaming and the mind stop racing and the soul stop calculating odds of survival. Today was for being alive, for breathing, for standing in sunlight and feeling warmth and remembering that some things were worth the pen even when the cost was everything. Frozen valor. Not the fighting, not the killing, not the dying, the living that came after. The carrying, the remembering, the refusing to let sacrifice become invisible. The real courage, the kind that lasted, the kind that mattered when everything else faded. What Murphy and Preacher and Lee had died for. Not to win a battle, not to complete a mission, but to prove that honor still existed, that warriors still cared, that some things were worth dying for, even when dying meant you'd never see the world you were trying to create. And now Hawk and Bull and Rachel carried that forward, made it real, made it permanent, made it something that would outlast them all, made sure that when they died, the story would continue, the memory would endure. That was legacy. That was meaning. That was what made survival worth the guilt and the grief and the weight of living when others couldn't. Frozen valor, and it was enough, had to be, because that was all anyone could do. Remember, honor, carry forward, make it mean something even when meaning seemed impossible. The whiskey was gone, the night was deep, but the stars remained, and the memory remained. And somehow, impossibly, enough. The Turkish medical facility smelled like antiseptic in defeat. Hawk sat in a plastic chair that was too small for his frame, watching doctors work on Marines who'd survived a mountain but might not survive their wounds. The fluorescent lights hummed, constant, irritating. The sound of civilization that felt alien after days of wind and gunfire and silence broken only by dying. Rachel was in surgery, emergency procedure. They'd found internal bleeding from when she'd carried Foster across the knife-edge trail. Something had torn, something critical. The doctor said she'd be fine, but doctors always said that whether it was true or not. Hawk had learned to distrust certainty. Certainty was what got people killed. Bull sat beside him. Neither man spoke. What was there to say? They'd survived. Most of them. 398 out of 480. The math that said success if you didn't look too close at the pond, but they were looking close. Couldn't help it. When you closed your eyes, you saw Murphy building his last trap. Preacher praying over a perimeter that would become his grave. Lee smiling as his body shut down one system at a time. A Turkish officer approached. Colonel Mehmet Aksoy, 50-something, career military, eyes that had seen Turkey's own wars and recognized kindred spirits in these broken Americans. Master Sergeant Hawkins, your wounded are stable, most will survive, some will not. That is the nature of war. His English was formal, precise, the accent of someone who'd learned the language from books before learning it from people. Thank you for your hospitality, Colonel. We won't forget this. You would do the same for us. That is what allies do. But I must tell you something. Your embassy has been notified. They are sending people, important people, the kind who ask difficult questions and expect simple answers. Hawk nodded, expected. The reckoning was coming faster than he'd hoped. How long do we have? They arrive in 6 hours. I would use that time wisely. Whatever story you plan to tell, make sure you all tell the same one. Aksoy walked away. Left Hawk and Bull sitting in chairs too small and a silence too large. 6 hours to decide how much truth to share, how much to protect, how many lies were necessary to survive the aftermath of surviving. Bull broke the silence first. We need to talk to Al-Rashid. Make sure he understands what's at stake. Make sure he's willing to testify. They found the scientists in a private room, under guard, not Turkish guards, American. 2 men in civilian clothes who were clearly military. The kind of security that said someone important wanted him watched, or silenced, possibly both. The guards let Hawk and Bull pass. Professional courtesy between warriors, even when the warriors served different masters. Inside, al-Rashid sat on the edge of his bed, face gray, hands shaking. The man who'd caused all this. The man whose secrets had bought 82 lives. Master Sergeant Hawkins, I heard about your losses. I'm sorry, truly. Sorry doesn't bring them back. The words came out harder than Hawk intended, anger surfacing. The kind of rage that had no outlet because the people responsible were dead or too powerful to touch. So it focused on the available target, this soft-handed man with his secrets and his fear. No, it doesn't. Nothing does. But I want you to know those deaths meant something. What I'm carrying will save thousands, maybe millions. That has to count for something. Does it? Does abstract future lives balance against specific present deaths? Does the math work when you're the one doing the counting? Al-Rashid looked away. Couldn't hold Hawk's gaze. Couldn't face the accusation living there. Bull stepped forward. His voice was calmer, tactical, focused. In 6 hours, CIA is coming. They'll want to debrief you, privately, away from witnesses. You understand what that means? They'll kill me. Make it look like accident or suicide. Bury the evidence. Pretend none of this happened. Probably. Unless we get ahead of it. Unless we make this public before they can contain it. You still have the microfilm? Al-Rashid patted his pocket. The small waterproof case that had cost so much blood to protect. Everything is here. Documentation. Photos. Proof that cannot be denied or explained away. But if I go public, I'm dead. CIA. Iraqi intelligence, Mossad. Everyone wants this buried. Everyone has reason to kill me. That's the price. Your life or your conscience. Your safety or the truth. You chose truth when you defected. Too late to change your mind now. The scientist stood, paced. A caged animal realizing the cage had no door, just bars and the illusion that escape existed. What if I run, disappear, find some country that will hide me? Hawk almost laughed. Almost. But laughter felt wrong. Then Murphy and Preacher and Lee died for nothing. Then 82 Marines bought you time to be a coward. Then everything we did was just delaying the inevitable. You run, the truth dies with you. Secret stays secret. The people responsible keep their power. Keep sending kids to die for lies. Keep doing what they've always done because nobody stopped them. The words hit like physical blows. Al-Rashid sat, put his head in his hands. A man realizing that survival came with costs he hadn't calculated. That living meant owing debts to the dead. What do you need from me? Everything. Full testimony, names, dates, documents. We're going to call every reporter we can find. CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, everyone. We're going to hold a press conference and burn it all down. The lies, the cover-up, the whole rotten structure. And you're going to stand beside us and tell the truth even if it kills you. Because if I don't, I'm no better than the people who created this mess. Now you're learning. They spent the next 4 hours preparing. Bull contacted journalists, old friends from his bar who had connections, people who'd covered Gulf War, people who understood that some stories were worth careers in safety and everything else. Hawk gathered the Marines, 398 survivors in a briefing room that smelled like coffee and apprehension. Young faces that had aged decades. Eyes that had seen too much and couldn't unsee it. Bodies that had been pushed beyond limits and were only now realizing the damage. Listen up. In 2 hours, CIA arrives. They're going to want statements. They're going to pressure us. They're going to threaten court-martial. Dishonorable discharge, prison. Everything they can think of to make us fall in line. The room was silent. Attention absolute. These kids had learned to listen when Hawk spoke. Learned that his words kept them alive. They're going to tell you that what happened in those mountains was classified. That talking about it is treason. That protecting secrets is more important than truth. They're going to make you choose between career and conscience. He paused. Let it sink in. Let them feel the weight of what was coming. I'm choosing conscience. I'm going public. Telling everything. Showing the evidence. Making sure the world knows what happened and why. I'm doing this even though it probably ends my life as I know it. Court-martial. Prison. Dishonorable discharge. All of it. I'm accepting that cost because Murphy and Preacher and Lee deserve truth. Because the 82 who didn't make it deserve more than being forgotten. Some of the Marines shifted. Uncomfortable. The weight of decisions settling on shoulders too young to carry it. I'm not asking you to join me. You've sacrificed enough. You've earned the right to stay quiet, to follow orders, to protect your careers and futures. I won't judge any of you for that choice. But if you want to stand with me, if you want to make sure this matters, I need you to be willing to lose everything to tell the truth. He looked at each face, saw fear, saw courage, saw young people wrestling with choices that should never be theirs to make. Corporal Foster stood, the kid with the broken leg Rachel had carried across the knife edge. He was on crutches, would be for months, maybe forever. I'm in, Master Sergeant. They need to know. My parents need to know why I'll never walk right again, why I wake up screaming, why coming home is harder than staying there. They need to know it wasn't for nothing. Lance Corporal Chen stood next, the smart one, the one who questioned orders. I'm in. My grandfather fought in World War II, told me stories about honor and duty and doing what's right even when it costs you. This is what's right, so I'm in. One by one, they stood. Not all of them. Some stayed seated. Some chose silence and safety, and the future they would earn through blood. Hawk didn't blame them. Everyone had limits. Everyone had the right to choose their own cost. But 263 stood, more than half. Enough to matter. Enough to make the story impossible to bury. Enough to turn individual testimony into collective truth that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. Bull stepped forward, looked at Hawk with something like pride. Semper Fi, brother. Semper Fi. Reeves was last to stand, the captain who'd grown into command through failure and fire. He looked different now, older, harder, carrying weight that would never fully lift. I knew. Before we left, I knew the mission was compromised. I stayed silent because I was afraid, because I thought following orders mattered more than questioning them. 82 Marines are dead because I was a coward. I can't fix that, can't bring them back. But I can make sure everyone knows what happened, even if it destroys me, especially if it destroys me. His voice broke on the last words, the weight of guilt and grief and the certain knowledge that some sins couldn't be forgiven, only carried. Hawk nodded. Respect for the man Reeves had become, even as he grieved the man Reeves should have been earlier. The CIA arrived exactly on time. 3 people, 2 men in suits that cost more than most Marines made in a month. One woman with eyes like a predator and a smile that promised nothing good. They introduced themselves with names that were probably false, titles that were definitely vague. The lead man did the talking, early 50s, silver hair, voice like silk over steel. Master Sergeant Hawkins, Captain Reeves, Master Sergeant Maddox, we need to debrief you on the events in northern Iraq. Privately. Classified setting, national security protocols. Hawk didn't stand, didn't show deference. Just looked at these people who'd sent kids to die and felt nothing about it. We're not doing private debriefs. We're doing public testimony, press conference, full disclosure, everything that happened and why. The silk voice got harder, the steel showing through. That's not possible. The mission was classified. Disclosure would compromise ongoing operations, endanger American lives, violate federal law. You'd be committing treason. Bull laughed, actually laughed, a sound with no humor in it. We already committed treason. When we decided the truth mattered more than your secrets, when we chose 82 dead Marines over your careers, when we stopped being tools and started being people. The woman spoke for the first time. Her voice was ice. You'll be court-martialed. All of you. Dishonorable discharge. Federal prison. 20 years minimum. Your families will suffer. Your reputations will be destroyed. Everything you've built will be gone. Is that what you want? What I want is for Murphy and Preacher and Lee to not be dead. What I want is for those kids in the snow with bullets in their heads to be alive. What I want is a lot of things I can't have. So I'll settle for truth, for making sure everyone knows what you did, what you're still doing. Hawk stood face to face with people who thought power made them untouchable. In 30 minutes, we're holding a press conference. Dr. Al-Rashid will testify, will show evidence, will name names, will tell our story. All of it. You can court-martial us afterward. You can destroy our lives. You can do whatever you think you need to do. But you can't stop this. The story is already out. We sent copies of everything to journalists, to Congress, to international media. It's done. You lost. The CIA people looked at each other. Silent communication. Calculating. deciding how much damage control was possible, how much truth they could contain, how much of their world was about to burn. The woman smiled, cold, final, the smile of someone accepting defeat but promising retribution. You've made powerful enemies today, people who don't forget, people who don't forgive. You'll spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders, wondering when payment comes due. Was it worth it? Hawk thought about Murphy's last stand, Preacher's quiet courage, Lee's final smile, thought about Rachel in surgery, about 82 Marines who'd never see home, about choices that defined who you were when everything else was stripped away. Yes, it was worth it. The press conference was chaos. Cameras, reporters, questions shouted over questions. The feeding frenzy that came when truth collided with power and power lost. Al-Rashid stood at the microphone, hands shaking, voice steady, telling the world about chemical weapons and cover-ups in governments that valued secrets over lives. He showed documents, photos, evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The kind of truth that ended careers and started investigations that would reach the highest levels. Hawk stood behind him, Bull beside him, Reeves next to Bull, 263 Marines behind them, a wall of witnesses, a collective testimony that said this wasn't conspiracy or imagination. This was real. This was documented. This was the price of doing business with dictators and calling it policy. Reporters asked questions. Hawk answered them. Calm, factual. The voice of a man who'd made his choice and accepted the cost. Why are you doing this, knowing what it will cost you? Because the alternative is worse. The alternative is silence, is letting good people die for bad reasons and pretending it never happened, is becoming the kind of person who values career over conscience. I'd rather die honest than live complicit. The questions went on for 2 hours, every angle, every detail, the story being recorded, documented, impossible to bury now, the truth becoming public record, becoming history, becoming the thing that would outlive all of them. Rachel appeared halfway through, still weak from surgery, still pale, but standing. She worked her way to Hawk's side, took his hand, solidarity, support, the daughter who'd become a warrior standing beside the father who'd taught her how. When it was over, when the reporters had their footage and their quotes and their proof, Hawk walked outside. The Turkish sun was warm, strange after days of cold. He stood in the light and felt it on his face and tried to remember what normal felt like. Bull joined him. What happens now? Now we wait. Wait for the court-martial. Wait for the investigation. Wait for powerful people to decide how much revenge they need to feel whole. Think we'll see prison? Probably. Unless public pressure stops it. Unless the story gets big enough that prosecuting us becomes politically impossible. Either way, we'll pay. Question is how much and for how long. Worth it? Bull looked at him. 2 old men who'd been brothers longer than some people lived, who'd survived wars and peace and everything between. Who'd made a choice that would define the rest of their lives, however long or short those lives turned out to be. Worth it. The court-martial came 3 months later. Fort Leavenworth. Military tribunal. Charges of insubordination. Disclosure of classified information. Conduct unbecoming. The legal framework that turned conscience into crime and truth into treason. Hawk sat at the defense table. Bull beside him. Reeves down the row. 263 Marines facing similar charges in their own proceedings. The machinery of military justice grinding slow and inevitable. The prosecution was efficient, professional. They had regulations. They had precedent. They had everything except a good reason why following orders mattered more than exposing lies. The defense was simple. They told the truth, showed the evidence, called witnesses who testified about chemical weapons and cover-ups, and Marines dying to protect secrets that should never have existed. Al-Rashid testified. Under protection, under guard, still alive despite everyone's expectations. He told his story, showed his proof, named names that made people in the gallery shift uncomfortably. Rachel testified. Steady, clear. The medic who'd watched kids die, who'd made choices no one should make, who'd carried wounded across mountains and learned that war was nothing like the stories. She looked at the judges, 3 colonels who'd probably never been where she'd been, who'd probably never held a dying 19-year-old and lied about everything being okay. You want to know if we disobeyed orders? Yes, we did. We chose lives over protocol, truth over silence, conscience over career. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty, but I'll never apologize for it. Those Marines are alive because we broke your rules, and I'd break them again tomorrow if it saved even one more kid from dying for lies. The prosecution rested, the defense rested, the judges deliberated. The waiting was worse than the fighting. At least in combat, you knew where you stood. Here, everything was uncertain. The future balanced on old men deciding if truth was worth protecting or just another inconvenience. The verdict came on a gray morning, the kind of day that matched the mood. Hawk stood while they read it. Military bearing, eyes forward, face expressionless. The mask you wore when the world was watching and showing weakness felt like failure. Master Sergeant James Hawkins, on the charge of insubordination, not guilty. Something shifted in the room. Surprise, relief, the beginning of hope that maybe justice still existed somewhere in the machine. On the charge of unauthorized disclosure of classified information, not guilty. The reasoning was simple. The information disclosed was evidence of criminal activity. Whistleblower protections applied. National security couldn't be used to hide crimes against humanity. The law said so even when powerful people wished it didn't. On the charge of conduct unbecoming, not guilty. The tribunal finds that Master Sergeant Hawkins acted with honor and courage in circumstances that demanded both. His actions saved lives and exposed wrongdoing. The Marine Corps is better for having him. The nation is safer for his service. They acquitted everyone, all 263 Marines. Captain Reeves, Master Sergeant Maddox, the entire chain of choice that had led from mountains in Iraq to a courtroom in Kansas. Acquitted not despite their choices, but because of them. The room erupted, cheering, crying, the release of tension that had been building for months. The collective relief that said maybe the system works sometimes. Maybe truth mattered. Maybe conscience was still worth protecting. Hawk stood silent, feeling it wash over him. The victory that tasted like ash because Murphy and Preacher and Lee weren't here to see it. Because 82 Marines had bought this moment with their lives and couldn't collect on the investment. Bull grabbed him, pulled him into a hug that said everything words couldn't. Two old men who'd gambled everything and somehow won. Who'd bet their lives on truth and found out truth still had value in a world that seemed to have forgotten. Rachel was crying, happy tears and sad tears mixing into something that had no name. She held Hawk and Bull and cried for everyone who'd made it and everyone who hadn't. Cried for the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. Cried because sometimes surviving was harder than dying, and nobody talked about that part. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Veterans, families of the fallen, reporters, people who'd followed the story and made it impossible to bury. They cheered when Hawk walked out. Treated him like a hero when he felt like anything but. A woman approached, 60-something. Gray hair, eyes red from crying. She held a photo. Young Marine, 19 maybe, smiling. The smile of someone who didn't know what was coming. This is my son, Private First Class Daniel Murphy. He died on that mountain. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for bringing him home. Thank you for making it mean something. She pressed the photo into Hawk's hands. He looked at the face, tried to remember. Had he known this kid? Had he spoken to him? Had he watched him die? The faces blurred together after a while, the dead becoming a collective weight rather than individual ghosts. Your son was brave. He did everything right. I'm sorry we couldn't save him. You saved 398 others. That's not nothing. That's everything. Danny would be proud that his death helped expose this, that it might stop other mothers from losing their sons. Thank you for that. She walked away, left Hawk holding the photo, looking at a face that would never age, never laugh again, never come home except in a box with a flag. Bull appeared at his shoulder. How many more of those do you think we'll get? 82, one for each, and we'll take every one. We'll remember every face, every name. We'll carry them because that's what we signed up for. Not the fighting, not the killing, the carrying. That's the real job, the one that never ends. They stood in the sun, two old warriors who'd survived when survival seemed impossible, who'd told the truth when truth seemed dangerous, who'd bet everything on the idea that honor still mattered and somehow won. But winning felt hollow, felt like something you said when you needed to believe loss had meaning. The truth was Murphy and Preacher and Lee were still dead. The kids in the snow still had bullets in their heads. War still existed. People still died for lies. Nothing fundamental had changed except now more people knew about it. Maybe that was enough. Maybe awareness was the first step toward change. Maybe exposing the machine was how you started dismantling it. Maybe. Or maybe it was just another story, another scandal, another moment of outrage that would fade when the next crisis arrived. Maybe nothing changed. Maybe it never did. Maybe they'd fought and bled and died for a headline that would be forgotten by next week. Hawk didn't know, couldn't know. You did what you thought was right and hoped it mattered. That was all anyone could do. The rest was up to forces bigger than individual choice, bigger than individual sacrifice, bigger than anything except maybe collective will and collective memory. Rachel took his hand. "Let's go home, Dad." Home. The word felt foreign. Montana was home. But home was also the mountains where Murphy died, the perimeter where Preacher made his stand, the plateau where Lee breathed his last. Home was everywhere you'd left pieces of yourself, everywhere ghosts lived, everywhere memory turned geography into something that haunted. But maybe Montana could be home again. Maybe he could return to his workshop and his wood and his quiet life. Maybe he could teach Rachel to carve memorial plaques, pass on the skill, create something beautiful from grief, turn loss into art, make the dead immortal in wood and memory. Maybe that was how you survived surviving. You created, you remembered, you honored. You carried the dead without being buried by their weight. You learned to live with ghosts as companions rather than burdens. You accepted that some scars never healed, and that was okay because scars proved you'd survived the wound. That was frozen valor, not the fighting, not the shooting, not the Hollywood version of heroism. It was waking up the next day despite everything. It was choosing to live when dying seemed easier. It was carrying grief and guilt and memory and somehow staying human through it all. It was standing in sunlight after months of cold, holding your daughter's hand, knowing your friends were gone but not forgotten, knowing you'd made choices that cost you everything and you'd make them again because some things were worth the price, even when the price was everything. That was the lesson. That was the truth. That was what war taught when you survived long enough to learn it. Not that fighting was glorious, not that dying was meaningful, just that some things mattered enough to sacrifice for. And sometimes those things were small, personal, human, like truth, like honor, like making sure the dead were remembered and the living could make different choices because someone stood up and said no. This far, no further. Not in my name, not without consequence, not without someone bearing witness and making it count. Hawk looked at Bull, at Rachel, at the courthouse where they'd been judged and found worthy, at the sky that was blue despite everything, at the world that kept turning despite all the reasons it should stop. He thought about Murphy's last words, Preacher's quiet courage, Lee's final smile, thought about 82 Marines who'd given everything so others could give nothing. Worth it, all of it, every moment, every choice, every sacrifice, because that's what made you human. That's what separated warriors from killers, honor from violence, life from mere survival. That was the frozen valor, the thing that endured when everything else turned to ash and ice and memory. The thing that said you'd stood in the cold and refused to freeze. You'd faced death and chosen life. You'd carried the weight and somehow kept walking. And if that wasn't victory, it was at least defiance. And sometimes defiance was all you had. Sometimes it was enough. The crowd was dispersing, life moving on, the story becoming history, becoming yesterday's news. That was okay. That was how it worked. You had your moment, you spoke your truth, then you went back to living and let the world decide what it meant. Hawk took a last look at the courthouse, at the place where justice had happened despite all the reasons it shouldn't, at the symbol of a system that was broken but occasionally worked anyway. Then he turned away, walked toward wherever came next, Bull on one side, Rachel on the other. Three people who'd been to hell and walked back out, who'd paid the price and earned the right to stop paying, at least for a while. Behind them the sun set, ahead the night was coming, but they'd survived worse nights, survived worse cold, survived worse everything. They'd survive this too, because that's what warriors did. They endured, they carried, they remembered, They made it mean something, even when meaning seemed impossible. That was enough, had to be, because that was all anyone could do. Survive, remember, honor. Try to make tomorrow better than yesterday, even when yesterday was built on blood and ice and choices that never stopped haunting. That was frozen valor. That was the truth. That was what remained when everything else was gone. And somehow, impossibly, it was enough. Montana looked the same. Snow on the mountains, pine trees standing sentinel. The workshop where Hawk had carved memorial plaques for 20 years still smelled like sawdust and coffee. But everything felt different, like he'd left part of himself in those Iraqi mountains and brought back something he didn't recognize. Something harder, something that didn't fit the quiet life he'd built. 6 months since the court-martial. 6 months of reporters calling, of veterans reaching out, of families wanting to know about sons and daughters who died in snow and been buried in truth. 6 months of trying to be normal when normal was a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Rachel lived with him now. She'd left the Marines, medical discharge, too many wounds physical and otherwise. She worked at the VA hospital in Missoula, helped other broken veterans put themselves back together. Tried to heal others since healing herself seemed impossible. She was in the kitchen making coffee when Hawk came in from his morning walk. 4 miles, same route he'd walked for 15 years. His knees screamed, his back was locked. But stopping felt like giving up, and he wasn't ready for that. Not yet, maybe never. "You were up early." Her voice was careful, the tone she used when checking if he was okay without actually asking. He taught her to shoot, to survive, to be a Marine, but she'd learned to be a caretaker on her own. And learned that warriors needed tending even when they pretended otherwise. Couldn't sleep, dreams again. She nodded, understood. She had the same dreams, different details, same weight. Murphy building his last trap. Preacher praying over a perimeter. Lee smiling as he died. The faces that visited when consciousness loosened its grip and memory flooded in. The coffee was strong, hot, real. Small things that mattered when so much felt unreal. Hawk held the cup and felt the warmth and tried to remember what peace felt like. Before Iraq, before the mountains, before he'd learned that mercy could turn to regret and choices could turn to ghosts. Bull called yesterday. He's coming up next week. Says he has something to show us. Hawk nodded. Bull had stayed in North Carolina, kept his bar, named it Murphy's Place, put photos on the walls, made it a shrine to old warriors and lost friends, a place where ghosts were welcome and memory was sacred. "How's he doing?" "Same as us, surviving, pretending that's the same as living." Rachel sat across from him. Her face was thinner than it used to be, older. The girl who'd danced on his boots was gone, replaced by a woman who'd killed and healed and learned that war took more than it gave and never fully gave it back. "Dad, we need to talk about something." The words that always preceded difficult conversations. Hawk set his coffee down, waited. Let her find her words in her own time. Patience was something war taught. The ability to wait, to let silence do the work. "I've been thinking about Murphy, about Preacher, about Lee, about all of them. And I realized something. We survived, but they didn't, and I can't figure out why. What made us special? What made us worthy of living when they weren't? Survivor's guilt. Every combat veteran's companion. The question that had no answer but demanded asking anyway. Nothing made us special. Nothing made us worthy. We just got lucky. Right place. Right choices. Physics and probability favoring us for reasons that have nothing to do with deserving. But that's not enough. That can't be enough. If it's just random, if there's no meaning, then what's the point? What's the point of surviving if survival is just an accident? Hawk looked at his daughter. This woman who'd become a warrior and was now trying to become human again. Who'd learned that the transition back was harder than the transformation forward. The point is what we do with the time we stole from death, the meaning we create, the way we honor them. Murphy and Preacher and Lee didn't die for nothing if we make sure their deaths changed something. Changed us. Changed how we live. Changed what we stand for. And what do we stand for? Truth, honor, the idea that conscience matters more than comfort. That some things are worth sacrificing for even when sacrifice costs everything. That's what they died for. That's what we have to live for now. Rachel was crying, silent tears that said she'd been holding this in for months. Trying to be strong, trying to be what everyone needed her to be. finally letting herself crack in the safety of her father's presence. I don't know how to live with this, Dad. I don't know how to wake up every day and pretend it's okay. Pretend I'm okay. Pretend the world makes sense when it clearly doesn't. Hawk moved to her side, held her the way he had when she was 6, and nightmares were just bad dreams. Before he'd learned that some nightmares were memories, before he'd helped create the very thing that now haunted them both. You don't pretend. You carry it. You let it hurt. You accept that some things don't heal. They just become part of who you are. And you keep going anyway. Not because it's easy, not because it feels good, but because Murphy and Preacher and Lee can't keep going and somebody has to finish what they started. What did they start? Living with honor, dying with meaning, proving that old warriors still matter. That courage isn't just for the young. That standing up when everything says sit down is how you become more than just another body waiting to stop breathing. They sat together in the kitchen, father and daughter, Marine and Marine, connected by blood and war and the shared weight of surviving when others hadn't. Outside, Montana was beautiful, indifferent, the kind of beauty that didn't care about human suffering or sacrifice or any of the things that seemed so important to the people experiencing them. The package arrived 3 days later, large, heavy, shipped from North Carolina with Bull's handwriting on the label. Hawk opened it on the workshop table, found photographs, dozens of them, the faces of every Marine who died in those mountains. 82 faces, 82 stories, 82 families who'd lost something irreplaceable. There was a letter. Bull's handwriting, rough, direct, the words of a man who wasn't good at sentiment but tried anyway. Hawk attached her photos from the families. They wanted you to see their kids as people, not just casualties, not just numbers in your count of the dead. Real kids with real lives and real dreams that ended in snow. I'm also sending wood. Walnut from a tree that grew in Murphy's backyard. He loved that tree, used to sit under it and drink beer and tell stories about people he'd lost. Seemed fitting that the tree should become something that remembers him. And the others. I'm thinking memorial plaques, one for each. You're the only one I trust to make them right, make them beautiful, make them worthy of what we lost. Bull. Hawk spread the photos on the table, looked at faces. Private First Class Jennifer Martinez, 19 years old, wanted to be a teacher, loved horses, died with her hands bound in the snow. Corporal Marcus Hayes, 22, engaged. His fiancée still wore the ring, hadn't taken it off in 6 months. Probably never would. Lance Corporal Thomas Chen, 24, smart, questioned orders, died proving that questioning wasn't cowardice. Private Daniel Murphy, 19. His mother had pressed his photo into Hawk's hands at the courthouse, asked him to remember, as if forgetting was possible. Face after face, name after name. The weight of it settling on his shoulders like snow that never melted, like cold that never left, like grief that became permanent. Rachel found him there hours later, still staring at photos, still trying to memorize faces, still trying to make sense of math that said some lived and some died, and the difference was just timing and luck and physics. Are you okay? Hawk didn't answer right away. The question was too big, too complicated. Okay was a country he'd left and couldn't find his way back to. Bull wants me to make memorial plaques, one for each of them, 82, from wood that grew in Murphy's yard. That's beautiful. He'd like that. They all would. I don't know if I can do it. Looking at these faces, learning their stories, making something permanent that says they mattered. What if I get it wrong? What if I make something that doesn't capture who they were? Then you make it anyway and trust that the trying matters more than the perfection. That's what Murphy would say. That's what they'd all say. Do the work, honor the dead, make it mean something even when meaning is hard. She was right. She was always right. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were different countries separated by rivers of grief that couldn't be crossed by thinking. The first plaque took 2 weeks. Private First Class Jennifer Martinez. Hawk carved her name, her dates, the eagle globe and anchor that said Marine. Then he added details, small things, a horse because she'd loved them, books because she'd wanted to teach, stars because somewhere her mother was looking up and wondering where her daughter had gone. He worked with hands that knew wood, that understood grain and texture and how to shape something beautiful from something raw. He worked until his fingers cramped, until his back screamed, until his eyes couldn't focus. Then he worked more because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering hurt too much. When it was done, he held it. This piece of wood that weighed nothing but somehow held the weight of a life, of a person who'd existed and mattered and was gone. He ran his fingers over the carving, felt the ridges, the smooth parts, the places where his tools had turned material into meaning. Rachel came to the workshop, looked at the plaque. Her eyes went wet, but she didn't cry. Just stood there holding something that proved her patient had been a person, had been real, had been more than just a body in a tent dying of wounds Rachel couldn't fix. It's perfect, Dad. She would have loved it. How do you know? You barely knew her. I held her hand while she died. Listened to her talk about horses and teaching and the future she'd planned. I know enough. This captures it. This says she mattered. Hawk made the second plaque, then the third. Each one took days. Each one demanded research. Learning about the person, understanding what made them unique, what made them more than just another name on a list of the dead. He learned that Corporal Hayes had played guitar, that Lance Corporal Chen had written poetry, that Private Murphy had been afraid of heights, but climbed mountains anyway because his friends needed him to. Learned that every life was a universe, complex, beautiful, irreplaceable. Bull came to visit in the spring. The snow was melting. The mountains were revealing themselves. The world was waking up from winter and pretending that rebirth erased what had been lost. It didn't. It never did. Bull looked older, gray hair gone white, face more lined, eyes that still saw everything but didn't judge what they saw, just witnessed, just remembered, just carried the weight that came from surviving when others didn't. He walked into the workshop, saw the plaques lining the walls, 27 completed, 55 still waiting. Each one a story, each one a life, each one a debt that could never be fully paid, only honored. My God, Hawk, these are beautiful. They're necessary. Don't know about beautiful. They're both. That's what makes them perfect. Bull picked up one plaque, Sergeant Marcus Stone, preacher, the friend who'd stood beside them, who'd stayed behind so others could leave, who'd died praying because prayer was what he did when everything else failed. The carving showed a dove, wings spread, rising, the symbol of peace that preacher had spent his life pursuing, the symbol of hope that he'd died protecting. Bull traced the outline with fingers that trembled. He would have loved this, would have said something profound about death and meaning and the resurrection of memory. Then he would have smiled and told a joke because preacher knew that grief needed laughter to stay human. You miss him every day, every hour, sometimes every breath. But the missing is good, means he mattered, means he wasn't just another body, means the hole he left is real and permanent and worthy of feeling. They stood in the workshop surrounded by wood and memory and the physical evidence that ghosts were real and demanded acknowledgement. Outside, spring was happening. Inside, winter remained, would always remain. That was the price of surviving, carrying winter in your chest when the world moved on to warmth. Rachel joined them. She'd been working at the VA, came home tired but fulfilled, found purpose in helping others find theirs, found meaning in being the person she'd needed when she'd come home broken. There's something you both should know. I've been offered a position, teaching combat medics, how to handle trauma, how to cope with loss, how to stay human when everything says to shut down. They want me at Fort Benning. The news hung there. Opportunity, purpose, the chance to turn pain into pedagogy, to make sure other medics knew what she'd learned in blood and grief and the weight of watching kids die despite everything she did. That's amazing, Rachel. You should take it. Bull's voice was certain, encouraging, the voice of someone who understood that healing came from helping others heal. I don't want to leave Dad alone. He's still making plaques, still carrying all of this. What if he needs me? Hawk looked at his daughter, this woman who'd become his caretaker when he'd spent years being hers, who'd learned that sometimes children had to parent parents, that sometimes warriors needed tending more than civilians. I'll be fine. You need to do this. Need to make sure other medics are better prepared than you were. That's how you honor the ones you couldn't save, by making sure others can. But the plaques, There are 55 left. That's years of work. I've got time. Got nothing but time. And the work is healing. Every plaque I make is a conversation with someone I failed to protect. Every carving is an apology and a promise. I need to finish this. Need to make sure all 82 are remembered. Rachel was crying again. The tears that came from love and fear, and the terrible knowledge that some distances couldn't be crossed even when you wanted to stay close. I'll visit. Every month, I promise. We'll work on the plaques together. Make sure they're right. Make sure everyone is honored the way they deserve. She hugged Hawk, held on longer than necessary. The embrace of someone saying goodbye who didn't want to admit that's what it was. Hawk held her back. His little girl who'd grown into something he admired even when he didn't fully understand. Who'd become a warrior and was now becoming a teacher. Who'd learned that the best way to heal was to help others do the same. Bull cleared his throat, the sound of a man interrupting a moment because practicality mattered even when emotions ran deep. There's something else. Something I need to tell you both. Murphy's wife wants to meet you, wants to thank you personally. She's in Billings, about 3 hours from here. I told her we'd come this weekend if you were willing. The prospect of meeting Murphy's widow felt like walking toward a firing squad. Voluntary, necessary, terrifying. What do you say to someone whose husband died so you could live? What words existed that didn't sound empty or insufficient or like excuses? We'll go. We owe her that much. The drive to Billings was quiet. 3 warriors in a truck that smelled like coffee in old leather and the ghosts that rode everywhere veterans went. The landscape rolled past. Montana in spring. Beautiful. Indifferent. The world that kept turning despite all the reasons it should stop. Murphy's wife lived in a small house near the edge of town. White paint, blue shutters, garden out front where flowers were starting to bloom. The kind of home that said normal life happened here. That peace was possible. That war was something that happened elsewhere to other people. She answered the door before they could knock. 60 years old. Silver hair. Eyes that had cried too much and weren't done crying yet. She looked at Hawk and Bull and Rachel, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the knowledge that grief connected people in ways words couldn't. Please, come in. I've made coffee. Her name was Margaret. She'd been married to Murphy for 38 years, had raised 3 kids, had 6 grandchildren, had built a life with a man who'd chosen to die so others could live, and she was still trying to figure out how to feel about that. The house smelled like cinnamon and old photos, pictures everywhere. Murphy young and whole, Murphy in uniform, Murphy holding babies who'd grown into adults, Murphy smiling like someone who'd lived well and knew it. Thank you for coming. I know this is hard, but I needed to meet the people my husband died for. Needed to put faces to the abstract. Needed to know he died for something real. Hawk didn't know what to say. Sorry felt insufficient. Thank you felt wrong. Everything felt inadequate when faced with a woman whose life had been shattered so his could continue. Your husband was the bravest man I ever met. He volunteered to stay behind, knew it meant death, did it anyway because that's who he was. We're alive because he was willing to die. That debt can never be repaid, only honored. Margaret nodded, tears running down her face. The kind that fell without sound because sound would break whatever was holding her together. Michael always said that if he had to die, he wanted it to matter. Wanted it to mean something, not just another casualty, not just another flag in a funeral. Something that changed things. That made the world better. Did it? Did his death matter? The question was razor wire, sharp, painful, true. Did it matter? Did any of it matter? 82 dead, 398 alive. The truth exposed, justice served. But did it change anything fundamental? Did it stop future wars? Did it prevent future lies? Did it save lives that would have been lost? Hawk didn't know, couldn't know, but he tried to answer anyway, because Margaret deserved something even if it was just hope. Your husband's death exposed crimes that reached the highest levels of government, led to investigations, prosecutions, policy changes, made it harder for people to send Marines to die for secrets, made it so the next time someone tries to bury truth, there's precedent for exposing it. That's not nothing. That's everything. Is it worth a life? Worth my husband? Worth sleeping alone for the rest of my life? Worth grandchildren who'll never really know their grandfather? No, Nothing is worth that. But sometimes life isn't about fair trades. Sometimes it's about making the best of unbearable choices. Your husband made his choice. He chose meaning over safety, legacy over longevity. He chose to be someone who stood up when everything said sit down. That matters. Maybe not enough. Maybe never enough. But it matters. Margaret pulled out a box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in Murphy's handwriting, addressed to his children, his grandchildren, his wife. Letters meant to be opened after his death. He wrote these before every deployment. Always. Just in case. This one is different. It's addressed to you, to the people he died protecting. He must have written it before he left, before he knew what would happen, but somehow he knew it might end this way. She handed Hawk an envelope, his name on the front in Murphy's rough handwriting. Master Sergeant James Hawkins. Private, personal. The last words of a dead friend, the message from beyond, the voice that would never speak again except through paper and ink and the permanence of final thoughts. Hawk opened it with hands that shook, read words that felt like prophecy, like Murphy had seen the future and tried to prepare them for it. Hawk, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Probably died doing something stupid but necessary. That's how I've lived. Seems fitting that's how I'd go. Don't blame yourself. Don't carry guilt like it's your job. I made my choices. I'm at peace with them. Whatever happened, happened because I decided it should. That's agency. That's freedom. That's the only real power any of us have. I want you to do something for me. I want you to live. Not just survive. Not just breathe and exist and wait to die. Live, laugh, create, love. Do all the things I won't get to do anymore. Do them loud and proud and without apology. Make something beautiful. You've got skill with wood. Use it. Create things that last. Things that say I was here and I mattered. And beauty is possible even after violence. Take care of my friend Bull. He'll pretend he's fine, but he's not. Nobody's fine after what we've been through. Be there for him. Let him be there for you. That's what brothers do. They carry each other. And tell my wife I love her. Tell my kids I'm proud of them. Tell my grandkids that Grandpa did his job. That's all any of us can do. Our job. Then we rest. Then someone else does theirs. Semper Fi, brother. We'll meet again when the mission is truly done. Murphy. Hawk folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, held it like scripture, like the dead man's testament, like words that carried weight beyond paper and ink. He lived. He's still living. Through you. Through the work you'll do. Through the beauty you'll create. Through the memories that won't die as long as we're here to remember them. Margaret smiled through tears. The smile of someone who'd lost everything and found something in the loss. Not comfort, not peace. Just the knowledge that her husband's death had rippled outward, had touched people, had mattered in ways both small and vast. They stayed for hours, talking, remembering, sharing stories about Murphy that made him more than a casualty, more than a name on a plaque, made him human, complex, real. The kind of person who laughed too loud and swore too much and loved absolutely. When they left, Margaret hugged each of them, held on like they were lifelines, connecting her to a man who couldn't be reached except through the people who'd known him, who'd fought beside him, who'd survived because he hadn't. Thank you. Thank you for making it mean something. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for living when he couldn't. The drive back to Montana was quieter than the drive out. 3 people processing grief and gratitude and the terrible weight of being alive when others weren't. Processing Murphy's letter, his final words, his command to live rather than merely survive. Bull broke the silence first. He was right, Murphy, about living instead of surviving. We've been surviving, breathing, existing, but not living, not really. We've been waiting. For what? Permission to move on? Permission to stop feeling guilty? That permission isn't coming. We have to give it to ourselves. How do you do that? How do you give yourself permission to be happy when so many aren't? You don't have to be happy. You just have to be present, engaged, doing things that matter, creating, building, helping. That's what Murphy meant. Stop waiting for the grief to end and start living alongside it. Rachel spoke from this back seat, her voice thoughtful, processing. At the VA, I see veterans who've been broken for decades, still fighting wars that ended before I was born, still carrying ghosts that won't rest. And the ones who heal, The ones who make it back, they all do the same thing. They find purpose, they help others, they turn their pain into something useful. That's what we need to do. What's our purpose? The plaques, teaching, making sure the next generation of Marines is better prepared, better trained, better supported. That's how we honor the dead, by making sure future Marines have a better chance. Hawk thought about the workshop, about 55 plaques still waiting, about 82 stories that needed telling, about wood and memory and the way beauty could emerge from grief if you had the patience to carve it. Purpose. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe that was how you survived surviving. You found something bigger than yourself, something that said your life had to mean something now because it was built on deaths that demanded meaning. That night, Hawk returned to the workshop, started the next plaque. Corporal Marcus Hayes, the kid who'd played guitar, who'd been nubbed, whose fiancée still wore his ring. Hawk carved the name, the dates, then added a guitar, strings detailed and precise. The instrument that had made music and now existed only in memory and wood. He worked through the night, through dawn, through the next day, working until his hands cramped, until his eyes blurred, until the plaque was finished and beautiful and worthy of the life it represented. Rachel found him in the workshop 3 days later, exhausted, covered in sawdust, surrounded by completed plaques. 10 more done, 45 remaining. The work of years compressed into days by urgency and guilt and the need to make meaning from loss. Dad, you need to rest. You're going to hurt yourself. I need to finish. Need to make sure they're all remembered, all honored, all known. You will, but not if you kill yourself doing it. You're 60. Your body can't do what it did at 20. You need to pace yourself. Need to let this be a marathon instead of a sprint. She was right. She was always right. But slowing down felt like forgetting, felt like the dead mattered less, felt like betrayal of the worst kind. Murphy's letter said to create beauty. That's what I'm doing, creating something beautiful from something terrible, making sure these kids are more than names, more than statistics, more than acceptable losses. And you are. These plaques are beautiful. They're perfect. They'll last generations. But you won't last generations if you don't take care of yourself. We need you. I need you. The work needs you. So please, rest, heal, then continue. But don't destroy yourself trying to honor the dead. They wouldn't want that. Hawk looked at his daughter, this woman who'd learned to be beyond her years, who'd learned that surviving required pacing, required rest, required acknowledging human limits even when those limits felt like weakness. Okay, I'll rest. 3 days, then back to work. Deal? Deal. The months passed. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. The plaques multiplied. Each one a conversation with the dead. Each one a promise kept. Each one a step towards something that might eventually feel like peace. Bull visited monthly, brought stories, brought laughter, brought the companionship that kept both of them human. 2 old warriors who'd survived the unsurvivable and were learning to live with what they'd become. Rachel taught at Fort Benning, came home on holidays, brought stories of medics she'd trained, of lives she'd potentially saved by teaching others what she'd learned in blood and snow, found purpose in the pedagogy of survival. The final plaque took 6 months. Private Daniel Murphy, 19 years old, the kid whose mother had thanked Hawk at the courthouse. The last of 82, the final debt that could never be paid, only honored. Hawk carved with care that bordered on obsession, every detail perfect, every line precise. The face that smiled from the wood was the face in the photograph. Young, hopeful, unaware of what was coming. The face of innocence about to be destroyed by war. When it was finished, Hawk stood back, looked at 82 plaques lining the workshop walls. 82 lives, 82 stories, 82 reasons to make sure he lived better than he had been. Lived louder, lived more deliberately, lived in a way that justified the deaths that had bought his life. Bull arrived that evening, brought whiskey, the good kind, the kind you save for moments that matter. They sat in the workshop surrounded by wood and memory, 2 old men who'd outlived friends and enemies, who'd survived when survival seemed impossible, who'd turned grief into art and art into legacy. To Murphy, to Preacher, to Lee, to all of them, the ones who stayed so we could leave, the ones who gave everything so we could have something. Bull raised his glass. Hawk matched him. They drank. The whiskey burned, tasted like smoke and age, and the certainty that some debts were paid in ritual, if not in full. What do we do now? Now that the plaques are done? Now that the work is finished? The work is never finished. Now we deliver them. Take them to families. Make sure they know their kids are remembered, that their deaths mattered, that someone cared enough to spend years carving memory into wood. That's a lot of traveling, a lot of families, a lot of grief. That's the job, the real job, not the fighting, not the surviving, the carrying, the remembering, the making sure that dead warriors aren't forgotten by the living world. When do we start? Tomorrow. We start tomorrow, because tomorrow is all we've got. Today is for whiskey and memory. Tomorrow is for action, for delivering beauty born from pain, for making sure every family knows that their Marine mattered, that their sacrifice was seen, that someone cared enough to carve their story into wood that will outlast us all. They sat in silence, two old warriors, two survivors, two men who'd learned that living after war was harder than fighting during it. That peace demanded more courage than combat, that creating meaning from loss was the hardest battle of all. Outside, Montana was beautiful, stars emerging as darkness fell, the kind of night that made you believe in something bigger than yourself, something that connected the living and the dead, something that said life mattered even when it ended, especially when it ended. Inside, 82 plaques waited, 82 stories, 82 legacies carved in wood and memory, and the determination of two old men who refused to let the dead be forgotten. That was frozen valor. Not the fighting, not the shooting, not the dying, but the living that came after. The carrying, the remembering, the refusing to let sacrifice become invisible. That was the real courage, the kind that lasted, the kind that mattered when everything else faded. That was what Murphy and Preacher and Lee had died for. Not to win a battle, not to complete a mission, but to prove that honor still existed, that warriors still cared, that some things were worth dying for even when dying meant you'd never see the world you were trying to create. And now Hawk and Bull and Rachel carried that forward, made it real, made it permanent, made it something that would outlast them all. Made sure that when they died, the story would continue. The plaques would remain, the memory would endure. That was legacy. That was meaning. That was what made survival worth the guilt and the grief and the weight of living when others couldn't. That was frozen valor. And it was enough, had to be, because that was all anyone could do. Remember, honor, carry forward, make it mean something even when meaning seemed impossible. The whiskey was gone. The night was deep, but the stars remained, and the plaques remained, and the memory remained. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. Tomorrow they would start delivering beauty born from blood. Tomorrow they would look families in the eye and say your child mattered. Tomorrow they would prove that old warriors still had purpose. But tonight was for rest, for reflection, for accepting that they'd done what they could, made what they could make, honored who they could honor. Tomorrow was for continuing. Tonight was for peace. And in a workshop in Montana, surrounded by wood and memory, two old warriors found something that might eventually become acceptance, might eventually become healing, might eventually become whatever came after war when war finally let you go. That was the frozen valor. The enduring, the carrying, the refusing to let the dead die twice by forgetting them. That was the legacy. That was enough.